Hello everyone and welcome back to Haunted Bedtime. I know many of you tune into these stories to help you drift off to sleep. So before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Back in either October or November of 2007, my family, my mother, father, younger brother and I moved into our very own house. It wasn't much more like a shack. The house itself was old and had actually been a banana packing shed in the past. Before this, we had lived in a house that was undeniably haunted. My mother and I both felt a presence there. She even saw things and felt physical. Not long after we moved into our new house, my grandfather on my mother's side fell seriously ill. We had to travel to New Zealand to say our goodbyes, but sadly, he passed away while we were still on the plane. Fast forward to December 2010, I came up with the idea of spending Christmas in New Zealand with all our family, since most of them lived there. While we were there, I could feel my grandfather's presence every time I sat in his chair. I could still smell the faint scent of his cigarettes. One day my brother, and I visited the grave of my other grandfather, my dad's father. My father placed a coin on his grave and said, "Come visit us sometime, Dad." I think that's when everything started. For the first 2 years of living in our house, nothing unusual happened, but by 2011, when I was around 14 or 15, I began to feel a presence. It was always there, watching me, and it never felt good. It made me uncomfortable, almost as if something had latched onto me at that time. I was struggling with deep depression, and I believe this entity fed off my emotions. There was always a negative energy in that house, made worse by my father's abusive nature and his short temper. Then at the end of 2013, my mother discovered my father was cheating on her. He moved out, and with him, some of that darkness seemed to fade away. By May 2014, when I was 17, I was in a really bad place mentally. I had finished high school the year before, but my depression weighed me down so much that I wasn't doing anything with my life. My mother, unable to handle it anymore, made me leave, and I moved in with my father. Meanwhile, my brother took my old room because it was bigger than his. About 6 months later, I returned home, moving into a separate room off the main house. Then I was in a much better mental state, but my brother had fallen into depression and anxiety. One day, while talking to my mother, I mentioned how I always felt something watching me in my old room. My brother, overhearing our conversation, turned pale. He told me that he felt the same thing. Then he shared something even more chilling. One night he had woken up completely paralyzed at 3:13. The foot of his bed, he saw a large black demon-like figure, its clothes torn and ragged. It stood there for a few seconds before vanishing into the ceiling. My mother and I immediately thought back to my father's words at his father's grave, "Come visit us sometime." Dad, could this presence have been my grandfather, or was it something else entirely? At the start of 2015, we decided to sell the house and look for a new place to rent. When my mother and I walked into the house we live in now, we both felt a strong sense of peace. It was completely different from our old home. We've been living here for 4 months now, and I truly believe that whatever haunted us in that house stayed behind now. All I feel around me are good energies. My mother and I both believe that my grandfather on her side is watching over us. I still don't know if that dark presence was my father's father or something else entirely, but whatever it was, it's finally left us alone, and I hope it stays that way forever. It was July the 1st, 2012, when my family and I were searching for a townhouse to rent. After looking around, we found one that was surprisingly affordable. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small lobby, a good-sized kitchen, a dinette, and a spacious living room. The best part was the second-floor balcony facing the highway. The offer seemed too good to be true. It included all utilities, free internet and cable, 2 parking spaces, and access to an outdoor pool, all for under $1000. We started moving in that same day. When we first saw the house, the landlord, Jake, was still painting the place. He told us we would be getting new appliances, including a fridge, stove, and sink, along with new ceramic tiles in the kitchen and dinette. The living room would have a fresh hardwood floor, even though the flooring was new. My wife's son and step Daughter still preferred wearing house slippers when walking around the house, had no air conditioning, but with all the windows open, the airflow made it feel cool and comfortable at first. Everything seemed normal. It was just another rental, nothing unusual about it. But as time passed, things began happening that made me wonder if something else was inside that house with us. One night in November, I was sitting on the couch watching P. My seat was angled in a way that allowed me to see both the television and the cars outside on the highway. I could also partially see into the dinette. The lights in the kitchen and dinette were off, and the screen door was in place to let the air in. My wife and step-daughter had already taken their snacks and gone to their rooms for the night. About 10 minutes after my wife left the kitchen, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A white dress moved into the kitchen. I turned my head, but then it had disappeared. Suddenly there was a loud crashing sound. It was as if someone was slamming things around in frustration. I jumped up and ran to the kitchen through the dinette entry, expecting to find someone there, but the room was empty. There was no mess. Nothing broken, no sign that anything had been disturbed. The only things that had changed were that the lights were now on and the tap was running. I turned off the tap and went upstairs. I asked my wife and stepdaughter if either of them had been downstairs, but both were still in their rooms, dressed in mud shorts and jogging pants. There was no way either of them had been in the kitchen wearing a white dress. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, maybe because of something bad I had eaten, but over the next few nights it kept happening. It wasn't just me. My family started acting differently every night around 11 o'clock p. My wife's son and stepdaughter would go into their rooms and close the doors. They never stayed in the living room late anymore. One night around 2 o'clock I was sitting in front of the TV playing Gator 5. The screen door was open, letting in the night air. Here suddenly the room became ice cold. At the same moment the kitchen and dinette lights turned on by themselves. I turned off my game and muted the TV. This time I was ready to catch whoever was sneaking around. Slowly I crept toward the dinette, staying quiet so I could surprise them. I peeked into the kitchen. No one was there. As I stepped back toward the washroom, the kitchen and dinette lights shut off by themselves. A chill ran down my spine. I hurriedly turned off the living room light and ran upstairs. As I reached the large window on the staircase, I caught something in the reflection. An old woman, and wearing a white dress with wild, unkempt white hair. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching me. I ran into my bedroom and locked the door. My wife was watching D. Without even looking at me, she simply said, "Don't say anything, just close the door." A few moments later, my step-daughter and son entered the room. No one said a word about what was happening. We all just stayed together watching Netflix until we fell asleep. The next morning when Jake came to pick up the rent, I asked him about the history of the house. He just laughed and casually said, "Oh, yeah, my mom used to own this place. She died in the living room." That single sentence sent chills down my spine. A few days later, my wife told me she wanted to move. She wouldn't explain why, just that she did not feel comfortable staying there anymore. I didn't argue with her. I had a feeling she had learned about Jake's mom, and I didn't want to know how she wasted no time packing. She and the kids only took what they needed and left immediately. I stayed behind to pack up the rest of our things. For the next few days, I was alone in the house, organizing and moving things bit by bit. The last 2 rooms left to pack were my son's room and the master bedroom. One afternoon, while I was packing my son's room, I had a clear view of the hallway. My step-daughter's now empty room was at the end of it. As I worked, the door to her room slowly creaked open. I stared at it, my heart pounding. The room was empty. The only thing inside was sunlight filtering through the window. Then the door suddenly slammed shut. I jumped and screamed, rushing to close my own door. I sat behind it, trying to calm myself. Then I heard it again, flop, 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 the unmistakable sound of bare feet walking down the hallway, then a knock on my door. I held my breath, my heart racing. Then I heard my wife's voice. "It's me." Open the door slowly. I turned the knob, hoping it wasn't something else standing there, but it really was my wife, along with a few friends who had come to help finish packing. As we packed up the last few things, I told her what had just happened. She wasn't surprised, she's angry. She'd Said she knows we're leaving that night. I was the last one in the house, finishing up my home office out of nowhere. Bang, my stepdaughter's room door flew open, then slammed shut. Then it happened again and again and again. Each time it slammed harder. I grabbed my bags and ran. I flew down the stairs, out the door, and into the car as my wife and I drove away. I glanced back at the townhouse, standing at the upstairs window watching us. Leave was the old. Them, everything I described, the girl, the way she looked, her eyes, her expression, and most horrifying of all, her teeth. My grandfather listened, silently, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he sighed and gently tucked me back into bed. It was just a bad dream. He said, though, the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe his own words, but instead of going back upstairs, he sat down in the rocking Ford chair next to me and stayed there for the rest of the night, as if keeping watch. Years passed. I eventually stopped thinking about that night, convincing myself that maybe it had just been a nightmare, but deep down, something about it never felt like a dream. It was too real, the weight pressing on my chest, the way she stared at me, the eerie silence before she disappeared. Then, about 10 years later, curiosity got the best of me. I finally asked my grandfather if he remembered that night. His face changed instantly. He didn't hesitate. I remember it like the back of my hand. He said my stomach turned. I had been hoping he would laugh it off, tell me that it really had just been a bad dream, but his serious expression told me otherwise. I swallowed hard and asked him the question I had been too afraid to ask all these years. Did you know what I saw that night? There was a long pause. Then, with a deep sigh, he finally spoke. The house, he said slowly, was built in 1909, and back then, something terrible happened here. My breath hitched. He went on to tell me about the original owners of the house, the young woman who had lived there over 100 years ago, and as it turned out, the very room I had been sleeping in used to be her bedroom. One horrifying night, a man broke into the house. He attacked her, stabbed her to death, and then dragged her body outside. But that wasn't even the worst part. After he killed her, he burned her body to ash right outside the house. He did it to send a message, to make an example out of her. I felt physically sick. I had seen her, and after hearing the story, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been trying to tell me something that night. Had she wanted help? Had she been trying to warn me about something? Or was it something else entirely? To this day, I don't know the answer, but one thing I do know: I will never ever sleep in that house again. We built our house on family land, which used to be a pasture. My husband and a close friend handled the electrical work themselves. Everything seemed normal at first, but only 2 days after we moved, and strange things began happening. Whenever I walked into a room to speak with my husband, the overhead lights would blow out. It happened again and again. No matter where I was in the house at night, every single smoke detector, all 5 of them, would start beeping one after the other for no reason. We tried everything to stop them. We took out the batteries, checked the wiring, but nothing helped. We were supposed to leave for a wedding in Key West just a couple of days after moving in, and we had no idea how to fix the electrical issues or even who to call. In the end, we just shut off the power completely before we left. When we got to Key West, we had rented a house with another couple. That's when things took a turn for the even stranger. Every time I stepped into the bedroom, the smoke detector in that house would start beeping. The moment I stepped out, it would stop. This went on for the entire 3 days we were there. The house had a strict no smoking policy, and there was no logical reason for the smoke detectors to act that way, but it was happening only when I entered the room. When we returned home, I decided to host a medium party with my friend, just for fun, nothing serious. We invited a well-known medium, someone people swore by. As soon as she stepped into our house, her expression changed. She looked at me and said, "You built this house on Indian land." She explained that the land used to belong to Native Americans, and there was a spirit here who wasn't happy. He wasn't evil or dangerous, but he was angry because we hadn't blessed the house before moving. And that's when she told me what to do: burn sage and bless the house. I took her advice seriously. That same week, I got some sage, burned it, and walked through every room, saying a blessing. That's when I first started feeling his presence. I nicknamed him the Chief. After that, the Chief was no longer Anne Grey, but he definitely made his presence known. It was almost like he had taken a liking to me. He started playing small pranks, hiding things around the house, moving objects, turning on electronics, but it wasn't scary anymore. It felt like he was watching over me, my husband, and I loved to travel on our Harley, riding across the country. One year we were on our way to Sturgis, South Dakota, for the big motorcycle rally. We stayed at an Indian-owned motel for the night, and when we left in the morning, we couldn't find our room key anywhere. We searched the entire room and finally had to pay a fee for a lost key. Before leaving that night, we arrived in Deadwood and checked into another motel. When we walked into the room, the missing key from the first motel was lying right in the middle of the bed. I laughed when I saw it. That was the Chief playing one of his little tricks again. There were other things too. We would go into town, and when we came back, every single battery-operated device in the house would be turned on, the alarm clocks, the remote controls, even my husband's razor. The house would be silent when we left and buzzing with electronics when we returned. The first few times it startled me, but after a while I just laughed. But there was one thing I didn't like. Every Monday night, my husband stayed with his 100-year-old mother to keep her company. I hated being alone, but I always reminded myself that it was for a good reason. One Monday night while I was sleeping, I felt someone lying next to me in bed. I could feel a warm body pressed against my back. My first thought was that my husband had come home early, which would have been odd, but not impossible. The presence felt familiar, comforting, but when I turned over to check, there was no one there. It happened again the next night, and this time I got scared. I knew it wasn't my husband, but it felt like someone was trying to comfort me, like they didn't want me to feel alone. I whispered, "Please, don't do this again. It's scaring May." And after that it never happened again. Then came the night that changed everything. I have always been a deep sleeper. Once I'm out, it takes a lot to wake me up. But one night my husband got up in the middle of the night and went to sleep on the couch in the living room. That's when I heard it. A chanting sound filled the house. It started soft, but it kept repeating, getting louder and louder, until it was so overwhelming it woke me up. I sat on the edge of the bed, completely confused. The chanting was still going, growing in intensity, and I realized it was coming from the living room. I got up, my heart pounding, and walked toward the sound. When I reached the living room, my husband was moaning in his sleep. He looked like he was trapped in a nightmare. I shook him awake, and when he finally opened his eyes, he gasped. He told me he had been dreaming that he was in a loader. He operates heavy machinery for work, and it was rolling over and over. He knew he was going to die, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wake up. I later found out that the chant I had heard is an Indian prayer. After that night, everything changed. I stopped feeling the Chief's presence. It was like he had disappeared completely, and that's when our luck took a turn for the worse. We retired all the time. No matter how much we rested, money seemed to vanish the moment we got it. Every time we got ahead, something broke. First the fridge, then the car, then another unexpected expense. It was one thing after another, like we couldn't catch a break. It made me wonder, was someone else here? And had the Chief used up all his energy protecting us and left, or had something else moved in, something that wasn't as friendly? I still miss the Chief. I never felt afraid when he was around, even when he played his tricks. But now the house feels different. I don't know if he's truly gone, or if he's just regaining his energy, waiting to return. But one thing is certain. Things have never been the same since that night before I made the final decision to move in with my husband. I was raising my son with the help of my mother. Life was simple, and my son was growing up in a loving home. One evening around 6 o'clock p.m., I was giving him a bath after he had just finished using the toilet. As I was scrubbing him clean, I noticed that he was staring at the bathroom door, which I had left slightly open. His expression was blank, his gaze locked onto something I couldn't see. I paused and asked him, "What are you looking at?" At first he didn't say anything. He simply pointed toward the door, his little finger trembling slightly. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried not to let it show. "Did you see someone?" I asked again, hoping he would say no this time. He nodded and softly said, "Man, I felt My stomach tightened. My son had never made up imaginary friends or spoken of things that weren't there before. My heart pounded as I forced myself to stay calm. "Is there a man at the door?" I asked carefully again. He nodded, his eyes wide with something. I couldn't quite place fear, curiosity, or both. I felt an sensation creeping up my spine. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, a shadow playing tricks on his young mind desperately. I leaned in and looked deep into his eyes, hoping to catch some kind of reflection of what he was seeing. There was nothing. I swallowed my unis and smiled reassuringly. "There's no one there, sweetheart," I told him, but in my heart I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or trying to convince myself. When I was done washing him, he hesitated before stepping out of the bathroom. As we walked past the door, he clung to me tightly, his little hands gripping my clothes. He kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting to see something or someone still standing there. Once we were out, I told my grandmother, who was the only other person home at the time, about what had happened. She simply shrugged, not giving it much thought. Later, when my parents came home from work, I told them too. Their reaction was the same, dismissive. They brushed it off as just a child's imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my son wasn't imagining things. People say that young children are more sensitive to the paranormal, that they can see things we can't. In my heart, I knew that what my son had seen was real, even if I couldn't see it myself. That night, as always, we gathered for our nightly Holy Rosary prayers. My family was deeply religious, and this was a ritual we never skipped. While we were in the middle of praying, my son, who had been playing quietly nearby, suddenly froze. His eyes darted to the empty space between the living room and the dining area. For a moment he didn't move. Then, as if something startled him, he let out a sharp cry, ran towards me, and clung tightly to my waist. He pointed toward the space where his gaze had been fixed. My father, who had seemed skeptical, Elia didn't hesitate this time. He got up, grabbed the holy water, and began sprinkling it toward the spot where my son had pointed. The air in the room felt heavy, as if something unseen was lingering there. Watching the next day, my son woke up burning with fever. There's a belief in the Philippines, especially among the older generation, that when a child sees an entity, they often get sick afterward. Some call it a kind of spiritual disturbance. At the time, I didn't know whether to believe it or not, but what happened next only made me more certain that something unnatural was in that house. The following afternoon, still shaken from the night before, I decided to stay in the living room with my son and my grandmother, waiting for my parents to return home from work. As evening fell, I got up to get a glass of water from the fridge in the dining area. That's when it happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. It wasn't just a fleeting shadow this time. It was a clear figure, a man standing right there. My entire body froze as I turned my head fully toward him. He was tall, dressed in brown clothes and wearing a large brown hat, the kind that reminded me of Katipunan revolutionaries. He wasn't looking at me. Instead, his eyes were fixed on my son, who was still playing with my grandmother in the living room. I couldn't tell if he was smiling, but something in my gut told me that he was. It wasn't a sinister feeling, though. If anything, I felt like he was fond of my child. Forcing myself to move, I turned back toward the living room and called out to my grandmother. My voice shook as I told her what I had just seen. She sighed, barely looking up from her knitting, and said, "Maybe he's just a passerby." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but something told me she already knew more than she was letting on. Years passed and life moved on. Eventually, I transferred to live with my husband, and my son grew older. We had another child, and life was peaceful. Unlike in that house, I never experienced anything out of the ordinary. After moving, my son too never spoke of seeing things again. It was as if whatever presence had been there had stayed behind. But then something else happened. Last February, I caught chickenpox and needed to isolate myself from my kids while I recovered my mother. Took them back to my hometown for nearly 2 weeks to care for them. Everything seemed normal, and when I was no longer contagious, when I was around 9, almost 10 years old, I lived in the back house of my family's property, right between a Christian church and an abandoned house. My parents and older brother lived with me, while the front house was occupied by My grandparents, my uncle and aunt, and their 5 children. On the surface, it seemed like a loving and lively household. My cousins and I were neighbors and first friends. We spent our days playing hide-and-seek, cops and robbers, and tag. Every day was an adventure, long before smartphones and the internet took over childhood. But behind closed doors, things were different for me. My aunt, uncle, and even my grandmother treated me like an outsider. I was adopted, and though no one ever said it outright, I always felt like that was the reason. My grandmother never considered my father, her stepson, to be part of her bloodline. But I think it was more than that. I was simply not accepted as family. One summer evening, we were playing hide-and-seek as usual. I remember every detail of that night, because it was the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday. Right at twilight, the sky glowed orange as the sun slowly set. I was running along the walkway between the church and my grandparents' house, looking for a place to hide. As I moved mid-stride, I suddenly felt a sharp pinch just under my rib cage on the left side. I stopped abruptly, my heart pounding, and lifted my white shirt to see what had happened. As I did, a silkworm fell to the ground. I cursed under my breath and rubbed at the irritation left behind by the worm. But when I lifted my head again, something felt different. The orange glow of the sky was gone. The world had changed. There was no sunset, no fading daylight, no creeping darkness. It was just empty. A heavy, deafening silence filled the air. The world around me seemed frozen in time. No sound, no movement, nothing. It was the most surreal feeling I have ever experienced. I turned toward my grandparents' house, and for some reason my eyes were drawn to a small basement window that looked into their home. The basement was dark and empty, but I couldn't look away. Something inside that darkness pulled me in. Then they appeared. 2 red eyes materialized in the blackness of the basement. A deep chill crawled up my spine. Even now, as I recall this, I get the same feeling, the kind that makes your ears ring with an unnatural silence. I was frozen, locked in a staring contest with whatever was watching me from the basement. I don't remember feeling scared in that moment. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something worse. I felt completely alone. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into those eyes. It could have been seconds or hours. Time didn't seem to exist anymore. And then I blinked the moment my eyes shut and opened again. Everything came rushing back. The sunset returned. The sounds of my cousins playing in the distance filled the air. The heaviness lifted. My body was no longer paralyzed. I ran. I didn't care where. I just needed to get away from there. I found a hiding spot and sat there, trying to calm my racing heart. But then reality hit me. What had just happened? A deep, consuming fear took over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end and goosebumps covered my skin. I knew I had seen something real after that night. My life changed. It was as if something had attached itself to me. For years, I was plagued with bad luck. I went through deep depression and self-loathing throughout middle school. I saw shadows in places where there shouldn't have been any. I saw faces out of the corner of my eye that vanished. When I turned to look, I heard whispers inches from my ear, but the words were always too distorted to understand. I told no one for a long time. I thought maybe I was going crazy, but in 2009, when I was older and working at Best Buy, something happened that forced me to confront the truth. I was driving home late one night when I saw something dart across the freeway. It was so real, so solid, that I slammed on the brakes and swerved to avoid hitting it. My pulse was racing, my breathing ragged, my hands gripped the steering wheel. As I turned to look back, there was nothing. The freeway was completely empty, shaken. I continued driving and pulled into my driveway. As I turned off the engine, I heard a rattling sound coming from under the hood. It was odd, since I had just bought the car from the dealership 2 days earlier. I popped the hood and looked inside. My stomach dropped. The washer to my timing belt was hanging loose, completely unscrewed. The moment I reached for it, it fell off onto the ground. I felt sick. If I hadn't stopped my car when I did, if I had kept speeding down the freeway, I would have lost control. The thought made me nauseous. I ran inside and woke up my parents. That was the first time I took I was the first time I told them everything about the red eyes, the shadows, the voices, the feeling of being followed, being My parents took this seriously. They performed a large cleansing ceremony, trying to drive away whatever had attached itself to me. It didn't work. Desperate, my mother took me to a gypsy. I didn't believe Eve. In palm reading, but my mother had already spent a lot of money to see her, so I went along with it. The gypsy took my hand and started telling me things she shouldn't have known, things no one should have known. Then she looked at me and said something that made my blood run cold. You're adopted. I froze. I froze. I'd never told her that she had never met me before. Then she said, you saw red eyes when you were a child. My mouth went dry. She told me that the eyes I saw belonged to my biological grandmother. She had cursed me when I was a baby because I wasn't adopted by her biological son, my mother's brother. She had been following me ever since. I sat there, dumbstruck, unable to process what I had just heard. The gypsy then gave me a bundle of weeds and twigs shaped to look like a bird's nest. She told me to place it in my room and that it would ward her off for about a month. Everything was silent. No whispers, no shadows, no nightmares. Then slowly it started again. The closet door in the room would open by itself every night during sleep. Even now, it happens from time to time. There's more to the story, a lot more. But one thing is certain. Something is still there. At a young age, there was always the sensation of being watched. When alone, it wasn't fear exactly, just a lingering feeling, like unseen eyes hidden in the silence. It happened often, especially at night. At first it seemed like nothing more than an overactive imagination. The kind of harmless fear that comes from staring too long into the dark. But then something happened, something unforgettable. It was late, sometime past midnight. The room was silent, too silent. A glance toward the walk-in closet revealed the door was slightly open, and then it appeared. A white figure slowly leaned out from behind the door, as though it had been hiding, waiting. It had no face, no eyes, no expression, just a glowing, featureless silhouette, shaped like a person, breath caught in the throat. Then it lifted one finger to the place where its mouth should have been and whispered, "See Ashtage," etched. Just as suddenly, it vanished, slipping back into the closet without a sound, as if it had never been there. Everything froze. There had never been any paranormal experiences before. Logic scrambled for an explanation, maybe a trick of the light. A bad dream, but deep down something didn't feel imagined. The closet was checked. The light turned on. Every corner examined. No one was there. From that night forward, the closet door was always shut before sleeping. Years passed. The incident faded, but was never truly forgotten. Then someone else mentioned something. Another person who once lived in the same house, in the room next door. They admitted to feeling the same presence, the same cold awareness from the closet. Strangely, their closet was right next to the first, separated only by a wall. This raised a chilling question. Was it something tied to the house? The land. Even though the house was new, the area had a deep and forgotten history. A former mining town, silent remnants buried beneath years of change. Could echoes of the past remain? And then, years later, things escalated. Lucid dreaming had become common. Control in dreams, awareness, an exploration of the subconscious. But one night something changed. There was a strange illness, a sense of weakness before sleep. Then the sensation of leaving the body began. Eyes rolled back, limbs wouldn't move. The dream became something else, no longer a dream at all. It felt like floating above the body, like astral projection, but involuntary. The surroundings were familiar, yet wrong. A missing window, furniture rearranged. Everything was almost right, except the closet. It remained in its usual place, and from its dark frame she emerged. The white figure again, but this time with a face. Pale, featureless, yet haunting. She leaned slowly from the top of the closet door, reaching outward. She glowed, her form like soft white fire. A veil covered her head. Her long-sleeved dress floated with her movements. Then she began to chant. A woman's voice filled the space, soft, repetitive, in a language not known, not remembered. Like a lullaby from another world, but twisted, dissonant, unsettling. She emerged from the top of the closet door, slowly leaning out, reaching for me. She was glowing, her body luminescent, almost like a spirit made of light. Her hair was hidden beneath a veil, and she wore a long-sleeved dress that covered her entirely, and she was chanting. A woman's voice echoed around me, speaking in a foreign tongue. I didn't recognize her presence, didn't feel evil, but it was powerful, as if she was trying to communicate something to me. I snapped out of my paralysis and woke up instantly, gasping for air. My eyes were fixed on my closet door, still half expecting her to be there. And that's when I noticed something strange. My cat was sitting beside me, staring directly at me, wide-eyed, alert, completely still. It was as if she had seen the same thing I had. She just sat there looking at me with this knowing expression. I don't know why, but I felt this strong urge and unshakable feeling that my cat understood what had just happened. She had seen her too. I was rattled, but not afraid. There was something familiar about the woman, something almost protective. I didn't think she meant any harm. Maybe she had been watching over me all these years. Maybe she was a guardian rather than a threat. Even now I still feel a strong energy in my closet, whether it's her or something else, I don't know. But what I do know is this: whatever is in that house, it has been there for a long time, and it's not going anywhere. It all started about a year ago. At first it was just slight tapping sounds, something barely noticeable, unless the house was completely silent. I brushed it off, assuming it was just the house settling, or maybe some small animals in the walls. These sounds were faint and irregular, nothing that immediately made me think of anything paranormal. It was easy to rationalize them, to ignore them. But as time went on, I started noticing a pattern. The tapping would always happen when I was alone. It wasn't every night, but often enough, maybe 3 times a week, to make me start wondering if there was more to it every time it happened. I felt a wave of unease, something I couldn't explain. I wasn't the type to get scared easily, yet this made me nervous still. I pushed it aside, convincing myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Then, in August 2014, something changed. I was home alone one night when I heard it again, the tapping. This time it sounded like someone lightly drumming their finger against the kitchen countertop. Slow, deliberate, a soft, steady rhythm. It would stop for a few seconds, then start again. Over and over. Something about it felt wrong. As I listened, the sound moved. It wasn't just coming from one spot anymore. First, it was the kitchen counter. Then I heard it on the microwave. Then the cupboard, then the sink. It was as if something unseen was moving around the kitchen, tapping on different surfaces, as if testing them. Occasionally it would get louder, then quiet down again, as if whatever was making the noise was gathering energy before continuing. I stood there for nearly 20 minutes just listening. In hindsight, probably a stupid thing to do, but I needed to understand it that night. I finally told my husband. Up until then, I had kept quiet, not wanting to seem irrational, but after what I had just experienced, I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I needed him to know. As we sat in the living room, I explained everything: the tapping, the pattern, the feeling that it was somehow tied to me being alone. I expected him to react with curiosity or concern. Instead, he looked puzzled. "I've never heard any tapping," he said. "That unsettled me even more. If the house was making noises, shouldn't we both hear it? If it was something ordinary, why did it only happen when I was alone?" Then, as if on cue, we heard 2 loud knocks coming from the kitchen. My husband and I froze. I could tell from the way his face changed that he heard it too. We immediately went to check, but everything was in its place. Nothing had moved after that night. The noises became relentless. I started hearing tapping and knocking every single day, but only when I was alone. Sometimes it would be loud, other times just a soft knock on the wall or table, but it was always in the knocking same room as me. Then something even stranger began happening. Whenever the tapping started, I would feel overwhelming fatigue. It wasn't like normal tiredness. It wasn't the type of exhaustion that comes from a long day. It was heavy, almost like something was draining my energy. I didn't want to deal with it. I just wanted to sleep, and this wasn't like me. I wasn't the type to nap or feel sluggish during the day, yet whenever the knocking or tapping started, I felt like I was being pulled into a deep exhaustion. We performed regular cleansings in our home, spiritual protections, rituals, everything we could think of, but somehow this still got through sometimes when the tapping started. I would call my husband into the room. I needed proof, needed someone else to experience what I was hearing. But every time someone got close to witnessing it, the phenomenon stopped. It was frustrating, almost like it wanted to isolate, to make the experience feel imagined, to make the mind spiral in doubt. As the months went by, things got worse. During the holidays, there was a trip abroad, hoping that leaving home might offer a break. But the tapping followed. That was the moment everything changed. The realization hit. This wasn't tied to a place, it was attached. When the experience was finally shared out loud, it happened again, loud knocks from another room, as if in direct response to being acknowledged. It had happened before too. Once the experience was spoken aloud, something would stir just enough to confirm its presence. At one point, it seemed like maybe this was a spirit trying to communicate, something not necessarily malicious. But that changed. During a difficult time caring for a beloved, aging pet, the presence escalated. The knocking became instant, especially while tending to the animal. It felt targeted, taunting, feeding on grief. One night, while kneeling on the floor, giving water through a syringe in total silence, something changed. Behind was the distinct sound of footsteps. They stopped right there. Then came a single deliberate tap against the floor. Not impatient, threatening. The animal reacted instantly, ears flat, eyes wide. It had seen something. A hand lashed out behind, swiping at empty air with a shout. The feeling vanished. Silence returned. The pet slowly calmed and curled up peacefully. After that, a protective prayer was spoken, an appeal for guidance and safety. The presence faded. Remarkably, the pet recovered, living a few more peaceful weeks before passing quietly in sleep, but the activity wasn't over. After returning home, strange disturbances resumed. The bed would begin to shake, not violently, just enough to feel. Taps echoed from furniture and walls. Doors shifted on their own, always with the familiar wave of fatigue and dread that accompanied the earlier encounters. A journal was started, marking the worst nights. One night, while alone, there came a whisper, a low male voice behind the shoulder speaking slowly. I am going to... It didn't finish. A sharp command was spoken aloud. It stopped instantly. The next time the presence returned, the air carried a rotting, death-like odor. Now there's a pattern. Whenever cleansing rituals are missed, the banging returns. The presence doesn't leave. It waits, watching, testing. It was around 7 p.m. walking home from a local train station. A shortcut led along the tracks, an old, quiet route. A long, empty goods train stood still, abandoned, around 25 to 30 carriages, rusting in place. Curiosity struck one of the empty carriages, was climbed into, hoping for something. Stranger, but inside was just silence, nothing but cold steel and dark corners. Back on the tracks, the walk continued. That's when it was heard, footsteps not theirs. They matched the pace, coming from one of the carriages, parallel as if someone was walking with them, but unseen. They stopped, turned, shined a light inside. Nothing. A chill settled in. Laughter tried to brush it off. Just the wind, a loose chain, a shifting pipe. Anything, but a few minutes later, just before crossing a small overpass near the tracks, it returned, a scratching, long, deliberate, like metal being dragged across the last carriage. It sent a shiver through the spine. They stopped again, turned, listened. It was there. Wasn't the sound of an animal or something shifting on its own. It was too deliberate, too mechanical, almost like someone was digging their nails into the metal and dragging them across. Fear started creeping in. Maybe it was a thief trying to break into one of the carriages. That seemed logical, but something about the sound felt wrong. We picked up our pace, walking faster. Then the dog started barking, not just barking, snarling, growling, howling with an aggression that made our blood run cold. There were 3 or 4 stray dogs, standing near the tracks, baring their teeth, their fur standing on end. At first, we thought they were barking at us, so we grabbed some stones from the ground, ready to defend ourselves. But then Something terrifying. The dogs weren't looking at us, they were barking at something behind us. A cold wave of dread rushed over me slowly. We turned around, and that's when we saw it, a white figure, standing still in the dim light. It had long hair, but its face was empty. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank. My body betrayed me. My stomach lurched, and I started vomiting from pure terror. My friend grabbed me by the arm, pulling me forward. We ran. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran through the bushes, scrambling up towards the road that led to the overbridge, but it followed us. I could feel it. The dogs, still barking, wildly raced past us, running even faster than we were. Somehow we made it to the road. My legs were shaking. My body felt weak. Up ahead, there was a small temple dedicated to Devi goddess, right across from an apartment complex. The sight of the temple made my knees buckle. I collapsed right in front of it. Augustine, being Christian, took out his cross pendant and pressed it onto my shoulder. Whispering a prayer, he turned back towards the thing still standing in the distance, staring at us from the tracks. He yelled for help. The watchman from the apartment complex across the street heard him and called my father. My dad rushed over, and by the time he arrived, the figure was gone. I woke up, the hospital, an IV needle in my hand, glucose dripping into my veins. My head felt heavy, my body drained. When I asked my dad what had happened, he told me I had fainted. The doctor said it was due to weakness, but I knew that wasn't the full story. The next day, I was feeling better, back home, resting. That night, around 11 o'clock p.m. I was about to lock the front door when I saw something outside. There was a figure standing beneath the almond tree in our yard. I blinked, shook my head, told myself it was my imagination. I turned away and went back inside to continue watching my movie. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was flat on the floor, unable to move. A force gripped my wrist hard, sending waves of searing pain through my arms. I couldn't scream. I could feel my mouth opening, but no sound came out. A voice, cold and unnatural, whispered in my ear, "Where is Enzyme?" I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what it was asking for, who or what in Zoom was. Then something changed. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of gun-grew metallic anklets, jingling, echoing through the house. And then she appeared, a woman in a bright orange sari, running towards me, her feet bare, her presence radiating power. The force holding me down vanished. Instantly, I blacked out. When I woke up, it was still night. My father was beside me, smiling. He told me that I had seen something that most people simply never get the chance to see in their lifetime. The goddess, a man, Devi herself, had come to protect me. My forehead was marked with sacred ash, and the floor around me was scattered with cinder kungu, signs of divine intervention. The next day, my father called a priest to perform a ritual to cleanse the house and thank the goddess for saving me. Even now, I still get goosebumps remembering that night. I don't know if you believe in ghosts or gods, but after what I went through, I know if evil exists, so does divine protection. I grew up with a small, restless dog, a West Highland Terrier, always barking at the littlest noise. He was the kind of dog that never settled, always alert, always moving. At night, he would often wake up for reasons unknown, wandering the house, making those small clicking noises on the wooden floors with his tiny paws. I never thought much of it, just another part of life with a hyperactive pet. But looking back, I wonder if he had been sensing something that I couldn't. It started one mild summer night. I was lying awake in bed, my room small and slightly cramped, tucked away upstairs just down the hall from my parents. The window was cracked open slightly, letting in the warm night air. The house was silent, except for the occasional rustling of the wind outside. Then I heard its soft, deliberate footsteps. They weren't coming from the hallway or outside my door, but from inside my room. I assumed it was the dog. It had to be him, circling the bed, as he sometimes did, but something about the sound felt different. It was too slow, too calculated. I listened carefully as the footsteps moved from one side of the bed to the other, then back again, like someone was pacing around me in a rhythmic pattern. It went on for minutes, each step measured and unbroken. Finally, I got annoyed and told him to leave, expecting to hear the patter of his feet running out the door. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then resumed this time, stopping right next to me on the left side of my bed. I turned quickly, ready to tell him off. Properly, there was nothing there. I sat up looking around the dimly lit room. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than usual, but the space around my bed was empty. I checked under the bed even though it was blocked off by storage boxes. Nothing could have fit under there. The only way out was the doorway, which was in clear sight, and the dog was nowhere to be seen. It didn't make sense. I convinced myself that maybe I had been half asleep and imagined it, but deep down, I knew I had been awake the entire time. I forced myself to push it out of my mind, telling myself I had overthought the whole thing. 3 years later, it happened again. By then, I had forgotten about that light. Other little things had happened, small unsettling moments I had brushed off, but nothing significant enough to make me think about it too much. But one night, I had a dream, a nightmare to be exact. In the dream, I woke up in bed, my room looking exactly as it did in reality. But something was wrong. I heard screaming, my parents' voices crying out in agony, their voices desperate and filled with terror. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway, and then I saw them, 2 figures standing in the dark. One was tall, its body long and unnatural limbs stretched too far to be human. The other was a dog, but not like any dog I had ever seen. Its shape was strange, almost cartoonish, as if a child had drawn a distorted version of a real animal. The dog paid no attention to me, walking past as if I wasn't there. But the tall figure stood still, watching me. I tried to run past it to get to my parents, but it reached out its unnaturally long arms, wrapping around my waist. The second its fingers touched me, I felt sharp pain, a deep stabbing sensation that dug under my skin, twisting and cutting. I woke up gasping, my body covered in sweat. My heart pounded against my ribs. As I lay there catching my breath, the pain had felt too real. The next morning, I went downstairs to shower. As I pulled off my pajamas, I froze. A thin red scratch ran from under my tricep through my armpit and across my stomach. It was unbroken, as if something had dragged a single sharp edge across my skin in one fluid motion. I stared at it in shock, my mind racing. I should have told someone, but I didn't. I pushed it out of my head, pretended it wasn't there. Maybe I had scratched myself in my sleep. Maybe it was just a coincidence. A year later, the footsteps returned. By then, I had moved into the basement. My parents had finished remodeling it, and it became my new space. It was darker, quieter, isolated from the rest of the house. One morning I got up early to play video games. It was a weekday, and I was home alone. As I sat there completely absorbed in the screen, I heard the sound again, footsteps, but this time they weren't inside my room. They were coming from above me. It sounded like someone was walking around upstairs, moving from room to room. The steps were clear and steady, too loud to be the house, settling, and they followed a pattern, walking to the stairwell, stopping, then moving away again, over and over. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken in. I grabbed golf putter as a weapon and waited. The footsteps continued, pacing in circles. My heart pounded in my chest. Then I stormed up the stairs, ready to confront whoever was there. The second my foot hit the top step, the noise stopped. The house was silent. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place, but there was no one there. I went back downstairs, still gripping the putter, my body tense. The second I sat down, the footsteps started again. I didn't move this time. I just sat there listening. They went to the stairwell, stopped, and then started walking again, but they never came down the stairs. This went on for 3 hours, stopping only when my dad finally came home. I never heard the footsteps upstairs again after that day. Years later, I became more interested in the paranormal. I got into tarot cards, crystal balls, and supernatural folklore. It was more of a curiosity than anything. I met new friends, went to college, and life moved on. Then I reconnected with an old friend from high school, a girl named Cass. She had always been a little strange, claiming she could see spirits and sense energies. At first, I entertained it as a fun quirk of hers, but over time her stories got more intense. One night she was at my house when I brought out my crystal ball. She fell into a trance, pulling at her hair, her expression vacant. When she came out of it, she looked scared. I started to feel nauseous, my stomach twisting violently. The second I stepped out of the room, I felt completely fine. Later, She claimed that my basement had been used for rituals before my family moved in. She insisted there was something still lingering there. Not long after that, I woke up in the middle of the night to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, around 5.5 feet, its body covered in black streaks against grey fur. It had the face of a canine, but its body was humanoid. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that it was just my blanket, bunched up in a strange way. But then the footsteps began again, fast, urgent, circling my bed. I threw off the blanket and lunged forward. Nothing was there. The next second, thunderous footsteps ran down the hall, up the stairs, and ended with a loud bang on the front door. Minutes later, my dad came inside. I yelled up to him, asking if he had heard anything. He hadn't. Later that night, Hamid, as he has called me, saying she and her boyfriend were hearing scratching noises all over their house. I don't know if everything that happened to me was connected. I don't know if Cass brought something out or if something had always been following me, but I do know this: the footsteps, they haven't completely stopped. When I was 14, my parents and I moved into my grandparents' old house in Michigan. My grandparents had relocated to Iowa from my grandfather's job, and my parents took over their house to maintain it. While they were away, the house had been in my family for decades and carried a deep history, not just of my immediate family, but of my ancestors who had settled there long ago. My grandparents, who originally came from Prussia, a country that no longer exists, had made this house their home in the early 1940s. They lived out their final years there, and both of them had passed away within its walls, but they weren't the only ones tied to the house. My great-grandmother's sister, Freda, was a black witch. She had married a 33rd-degree Masonic priest, and together they performed rituals in the woods behind the house. Frida hated my grandmother, perhaps because she was a woman of faith, someone who firmly believed in God. My great-grandfather, knowing the dangers of the dark arts, had always warned my father as a child about 2 black books in the world, emphasizing that he should always choose the right one. Even before we moved in, I had heard stories about the house, but I didn't expect to experience anything unusual myself. That changed quickly from the moment we settled in. Strange things started happening. Objects disappeared regularly, only to turn up in places where we never would have thought to look. It became an everyday occurrence, so much so that we stopped questioning it. After a while, at 16, my fear of the house grew stronger. My own bedroom, for some reason, felt unbearable. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in it, no matter how hard I tried. I started sleeping with my mother, something I never imagined I would do at that age, but I had no choice. At night, I would wake up suddenly, my body paralyzed, my chest heavy, as if something was lying on top of me. It wasn't like sleep paralysis. I could feel a force pressing me down, suffocating me, keeping me from moving or calling out. I could barely breathe. It always took everything in me to whisper one word: Jesus. And the moment I did, the pressure lifted. It never failed, but forcing myself to say his name out loud was a battle in itself, as though whatever was attacking me was actively trying to prevent me from speaking. The house had more than just that oppressive energy. At night, when I lay awake, I would hear noises coming from the second floor. It wasn't the creaks of an old house settling or random sounds in the distance. It was chaos, the kind of sounds you would expect from a room being torn apart, dressers slamming to the ground, bookshelves crashing, footsteps running across the wooden floor. The first few times I ran upstairs expecting to see a disaster, but there was never anything out of place. The room was just as it had always been, silent, undisturbed. Years passed, and I learned to live with the strange happenings. Then, when I got pregnant with my daughter, my boyfriend and I moved back into the house for a short time after she was born, just to save some money before getting a place of our own. At first, nothing happened. I thought maybe whatever had tormented me before had left, but I was wrong. It was mid-July, a hot and humid afternoon. My daughter and I were alone in the house. She had just finished her bottle and was about to fall asleep in my arms as I rocked her in the lazy boy chair in the living room. The TV was on in the background, and everything was quiet, peaceful. Then, without warning, I felt it. A sudden burst of freezing air came from the hallway. It wasn't just a slight chill. It felt like a blast from an air conditioner in full power, except there was no air conditioning in the house. 1 second the room was hot and humid, the next it was icy cold. The temperature change was so drastic that I could see my breath in the air, every hair on my body stood on end. I stopped rocking. I sat completely still, staring straight ahead too, afraid to turn toward the hallway. I could feel something there, something watching me, something standing just out of my line of sight. My instincts told me not to look, not to nodding away. I sat frozen in place for at least 5 minutes, barely breathing, but the cold air didn't disappear. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway. That's when I saw it. A tall figure draped in long black robes, floating about a foot off the ground. It moved slowly across the hallway, gliding past me. It didn't walk, it didn't make a sound, it just floated, unnatural, eerie, otherworldly. I watched, paralyzed in horror, as it drifted toward my parents' closed bedroom door. Then, without hesitation, it passed right through the solid wood, disappearing into the room. For a moment I couldn't move, then panic set in. I jumped up, clutching my daughter tightly to my chest, and ran to the hallway. I threw open the bedroom door. The room was empty, but the curtains were billowing, as if a strong wind had just passed through. I didn't wait to see if anything else would happen. I grabbed my daughter and ran out of the house, sitting outside for the next 3 hours, until my boyfriend came home from work. I couldn't go back in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still inside, watching, waiting. That was the first and only time I saw something in the house. I had felt things, heard things, but never seen anything until that moment. A few years later, my grandparents moved back to Michigan and reclaimed their house. I have visited many times since then, but nothing has ever happened. While they've been there, it's as if whatever haunted that house vanished when they returned. I don't know why. Maybe wherever it was had been tied to their absence. Maybe it fed on the emptiness of the house. Or maybe it had always been waiting for someone weaker, more vulnerable. Or maybe, just maybe, it still lingers, waiting for them to leave again. I don't know if you believe in ghosts, in dark forces, in spirits that refuse to move on, but I do, because I have lived with one. I was 10 years old when it happened. My Girl Scout troop had taken a trip to a dude ranch, a place with wide open fields, a bunkhouse, a mess hall, and even a pool. But the most unsettling thing about the ranch was the graveyard right next to the pool. That summer, the original Poltergeist movie had just come out. Almost all of us had seen it, and for many it was the first horror movie we had ever watched in a theater. Even the girls who hadn't seen it knew about the dreaded pool scene, the part where the bodies floated up from the murky water, their skeletal faces leaning in the dim light. The ranch itself was wide open, no trees to block the view between the bunkhouse and the mess hall. A cement walkway stretched between the two buildings, cutting through open grassy fields. It was along this walkway in broad daylight that my best friend and I had our encounter. We weren't talking, just walking in silence, enjoying the warm air and the sounds of nature around us. There was no wind, no rustling of trees, just the rhythmic sound of our feet on the path. Then I heard it, footsteps. At first, I thought it was one of the other girls walking behind us. The sound was clear, unmistakable footsteps, moving in perfect rhythm with ours, following us. I didn't say anything, just casually turned my head, expecting to see another Girl Scout catching up with us at that exact same moment. My best friend turned her head too. No one was there, but the footsteps didn't stop. They kept coming, the sound of feet hitting the pavement clear as day, but there was no one behind us. I locked eyes with my best friend. Her face mirrored mine, wide-eyed, pale mouth slightly open in disbelief. She looked back at the empty path, then back at me, and I could see it happening. The exact moment the realization sank in, we screamed at the same time. Then we ran. We sprinted full speed toward the mess hall, the sound of our pounding feet blending with the still audible footsteps behind us. We didn't dare turn around. We didn't stop. We just ran for our lives as we approached the mess hall. Just as we reached the steps, two of our friends jumped out from behind 2 barrels. Boo! They shouted, laughing. We let out another piercing scream, not because of them, but because we were already running from something unseen. Our friends looked at each other, confused. Their prank had worked, but our reaction was different, too intense. Then we started laughing loud, uncontrollable laughter mixed with relief. Our friends thought they had scared us, and we let them believe it for a second. Then we asked, still catching our breath, "How did you do that? How did you make the footsteps sound so far up the road?" They just stared at us. "What footsteps?" One of them asked. "The footsteps that were following us," my friend and I said at the same time. Our friends looked at each other again, this time with genuine confusion. They swore they hadn't made any footsteps. Their plan had only been to jump out and startle us. They hadn't even moved from their hiding spots before we arrived. I felt a chill run down my spine. We explained everything, the footsteps, the way we had both heard them and turned around at the same moment, how they had kept going even when we saw no one there. Instead of laughing it off, our friends became intrigued. "Let's go back," one of them said. We hesitated, but we were also 10-year-old girls, the kind who liked a little thrill, so we agreed. We led them back to the spot, standing in the same place, listening carefully. The silence stretched around us, thick and heavy. No footsteps. We waited. Nothing. We walked up and down the path, still nothing. Disappointed, we eventually gave up and walked back to the others. The moment had passed, but my friend and I knew what we had heard that night. After lights out, we made a decision. We were going back. The four of us waited until everyone else was asleep, then snuck out of the bunkhouse, moving as quietly as possible. The moon was bright overhead, illuminating the empty fields, casting long shadows along the path. We reached the spot where it had happened, and we waited. The silence pressed in around us. Nothing, not a single footstep. We stood there for what felt like forever, hoping, wanting something to happen. But the air was still and the path remained empty. We were disappointed, not because we wanted to be scared, but because we wanted proof, something the others could hear too, something that would make what we had experienced feel real, even to them. But the footsteps never came back. The next morning, everything felt normal again. The mess hall, the bunkhouse, the path, just ordinary places on a summer camping trip. But my best friend and I both knew what had happened. Even now, all these years later, I can still hear those footsteps in my mind, that rhythmic sound moving in step with ours, that eerie realization that no one was there, and that overwhelming fear that something unseen had been walking with us all along. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When we got married, my wife and I, both working in it firms, needed a place to settle. Our elders advised us to lease a house rather than rent one, so we started searching with that in mind. The area where we worked was developing rapidly. Just 2 kilometers apart, a main road divided the metropolitan city, which had the special economic zone for it, companies from the quieter village side. We wanted to avoid the pollution, noise, and congestion of the city, so we focused our search on the village side. The house we found was beautiful at first glance. It was the last house on the street, beyond which only farmland stretched out. The lease price was surprisingly reasonable, much lower than expected. At first, it seemed like the perfect deal. But when we sat down to weigh the positives and negatives, we both noticed that the negatives far outweighed the positives. Still, time was running out, and with our wedding approaching, we had to make a quick decision against our better judgment. We chose the house. The first 3 months were uneventful, but slowly a strange feeling started creeping, and I often felt suffocated inside the house, like the air was heavier than it should be. My sleep patterns became erratic. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sleep before 2 o'clock. And couldn't wake up before 9 o'clock, making it difficult to get to work on time. My professional and personal life began to take a downturn at work. No matter how much effort I put in, my projects failed, and my reputation suffered. My wife, who worked just as hard as me, faced the same problem. First, I was denied a raise at my company, and a few months later the same thing happened to her. It was as if no amount of effort could bring positive results. 4 months into our marriage, my wife got pregnant. Family members and relatives visited us frequently to celebrate the good news, but there was something unsettling about these visits. Every child who entered our house started crying uncontrollably if I tried to touch them. or soothe them. Their cries turned into screams. If their parents weren't around, the screaming became even worse. People started feeling uncomfortable around me, and it created the illusion that I was somehow mistreating the children. This went on every single time a child visited. Frustration began building up inside me. I started feeling angry all the time, as if I was constantly on edge. My wife and I, who had always been close, began arguing more often. Small misunderstandings turned into heated fights. The stress of financial struggles made things worse. The economic recession and inflation meant our expenses kept increasing, and we had to take loans to cover our marriage costs. We felt trapped in a cycle of stress, negativity, and bad luck. My concentration at work deteriorated. I couldn't focus. My mind was constantly either confused or consumed with anger. My wife was 8 months pregnant and preparing to leave for her mother's house for the delivery. Before she left, we had a long conversation about everything that had been happening. We both admitted that the house felt strange, that something about it wasn't right. It wasn't just bad luck, it felt deeper than that. We realized we had both been having the same eerie experiences, but had been too afraid to say it out loud. The kitchen was the most unsettling place in the house after dark. No matter who was inside, it always felt like someone was watching from the window. Even when we were together, the feeling never went away. The water from the kitchen tap was always freezing cold, even in the middle of the afternoon when the pipes outside were exposed to direct sunlight. Every afternoon between 3:30 p.m. and 5 o'clock p.m. and the living room would turn icy cold even on the hottest days. If someone was alone in the house during this time, they would feel an intense chill enough to make their bodies shiver. Dark corners inside and outside the house always seemed to have shifting shadows flickering just out of sight. The number of insects inside the house was abnormally high. Cockroaches, ants, lizards, and rats constantly invaded the space. We initially attributed it to the farmland nearby, but over time it started feeling unnatural. My wife admitted that she never felt safe in the house, especially when she was alone. I had felt the same way, but had avoided bringing it up, thinking it would only scare her more as her delivery date approached. I wanted to do something to lift her spirits. We decided to resolve our fights and make the best of our situation to ease her loneliness. I thought about getting a dog. My logic was that a dog would provide her with security, scare away the rats and snakes, and if there was indeed something supernatural in the house, it would sense it before we did. I brought home 2 German Shepherd. Perhaps my wife was hesitant at first since they were too young, but at the same time she was happy. Soon after, she left for her mother's house for the delivery the following month. Our son was born a month later. I lost my job. The problems escalated. The tenants who lived on the first floor of the house hated the dogs. They complained about them constantly. The dogs themselves behaved strangely. They were always restless, constantly trying to run away. They never stayed near the house's entrance and instead kept trying to get to the first floor. They never seemed at peace. I began arguing with my neighbors over the dogs. At this point, I started questioning my own decisions. Everything I did seemed to go wrong. My confidence shattered. I felt like I was the root cause of all our problems. My mental state deteriorated. I started seeing a psychiatrist to help with my anger, insomnia, and confusion. I was drowning in negativity, and at my lowest moments I even had suicidal thoughts. With my wife on maternity leave and no salary coming in, we struggled financially. I had no job. The burden became too much. After 3 months, I couldn't afford care for the dogs anymore. With a heavy heart, I sold them. The moment they were gone, within 10 days, I got a new job. It felt like the house had been suppressing my opportunities, and as soon as the dog left, something shifted. After 7 months away, my wife and child returned, but as soon as they arrived, my son's behavior changed drastically. He refused to play with his toys, even his favorites. He stopped responding to our voices, though he had been reacting normally before. The only time he showed an emotion was when he looked at the ceiling. He would fix his gaze on it, as if he was watching something we couldn't see. I brushed it off, assuming he was just adjusting to a new environment. But then he stopped drinking breast milk. Concerned, we took him to a doctor, but physically he was perfectly fine. Then every night between 12 o'clock a.m. and 1 o'clock a.m. he would suddenly wake up screaming as if someone had hurt him. His tiny body would tremble, his cries heartbreaking. The most terrifying part was that he would sit up straight from sleep without using his arms for support. Something a 6-month-old baby physically shouldn't be able to do. My wife became desperate for answers. I was still skeptical, but I knew we needed help. A neighbor suggested a mosque where exorcisms were performed. Even though we were Hindus, we had no other options. The priest at the mosque told us that a young ghost aged between 16 and 20 had attached itself to our child. He said the ghost considered the house its own and had developed an attachment to our son. But it did not want anyone else there. We started asking around, speaking to other neighbors about the house's history. What we found was horrifying. The previous owner had been a manipulative woman who had cheated her sister out of property inheritance. She had multiple affairs, including one with a black magician. Her youngest daughter, a 17-year-old girl, had resisted accepting the magician as her father. Shortly after she was found dead, the family claimed she had hanged herself due to poor exam scores, but many believed she had been murdered in a black magic ritual. Her death was never reported to the police. Her funeral was conducted quickly, without waiting for relatives. With this knowledge, we went back to the mosque. The priest told us to leave immediately. He said the ghost was in its full power inside the house, and he couldn't help us there that night. At exactly 12:02 a.m., our son shot up from his sleep with a scream, his tiny body trembling uncontrollably. Protective prayers had no effect. Our neighbor, the dead girl's aunt, came to our door and told us to leave immediately. The moment we stepped into her house, our son stopped crying. I stayed in that house alone for 2 more months. While looking for a new place one afternoon, I dreamed of a child jumping on my bed. At first it felt innocent, but then the child got closer. Fear gripped me. The child, now a girl, landed on my chest, her face hidden by her long hair. I woke up gasping. Before leaving, her match spoke aloud. I promised the spirit I would leave her house. From that day, nothing happened again. The first paranormal experience I ever had occurred when I was only 5 years old, shortly after my family moved into our new home. As a child, I had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and just lying there, thinking, until I eventually fell back to sleep. I was always used to the quiet of my room, and I had a nightlight on for reassurance, just in case I needed to get up in the night. This is an important detail, because it was during one of these quiet, sleepless nights that I experienced something I couldn't explain. I was lying in my bed, wide awake, when I suddenly noticed the light shift in the room. It wasn't a normal shift, as if the light had simply flickered. It was more like someone had walked into the room, casting a shadow across the walls. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine. The door to my room was slightly ajar, but I knew it was almost impossible for anyone to have walked in without making the door creak loudly. I was alone in my room, and everyone else in the house was asleep, so I knew it couldn't be anyone. I didn't want to investigate, so I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then it happened. I heard a whispering voice calling my name in a strange, distant tone. Brooke. Brooke. It was a woman's voice, and though it sounded faint and far away, it sent a wave of terror through me. I was too scared to move, to even turn my head. I stayed, frozen in place, waiting for something to happen, terrified that if I acknowledged the voice, something bad would occur. The whispering, however, didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder, more urgent. Brooke. 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 At that point, I figured the only way to stop it was to answer. I gathered every ounce of courage I could muster and finally spoke, saying, "What? Who's there?" The whispering stopped instantly. A heavy silence followed. I was almost relieved that the voice had stopped, but still my fear lingered. Slowly, I turned over in my bed, cautiously peeking out from under two covers, but there was no one there. The room was silent and still. I didn't know what to make of it. And at that moment I was too frightened to even consider it further. I just lay there staring into the dark, too scared to sleep, but too tired to stay awake after that night. My sense of fear in the house grew. I started feeling paranoid, especially when I was alone in my room. I couldn't shake the feeling. That someone or something was always watching me. The room was always cold, even when it was warm. Everywhere else in the house, I began to feel like there were eyes on me, even though no one was there. One day, my best friend came over to play. We were having a good time playing with dolls and chatting like we usually did, but then something strange happened. It was the middle of summer, but the temperature in my room suddenly dropped. It became freezing cold. We both looked at each other, confused. There was no air conditioning in my room, and the air felt like it came from an invisible source. But that was only the beginning. Suddenly the alarm clock on my nightstand started ringing. Though no one had touched it, it wasn't even set to go off. It was a decorative piece meant to look nice, but never actually used. And then the closet door began to creak open, as if something inside was pushing it from the yaw inside both of us. Froze staring at the door as it slowly inched open. It was one of those moments that you can never forget, the feeling that something was about to happen, something you couldn't control. We didn't wait to see what happened next. We both jumped up and ran out of the room in a panic, not looking back until we were safely downstairs. Neither of you spoke about it after, but I could tell that my friend had felt it too. From that day on, I avoided being in my room. Whenever I could, I kept the closet door shut and placed something heavy in front of it at night, making sure that it wouldn't open again. I stopped sleeping in my room altogether, and instead I would sleep in my mum's room. I couldn't stand the idea of being alone in that room, afraid of what might be lurking there. When I was about 6, I remember being allowed to stay up late because it was New Year's Eve. I was excited, but eventually fell asleep on the couch around 10 o'clock p.m. However, I woke up in the middle of the night, and to my shock, I found myself in my own room. I had no idea how I had ended up there. When I looked around, I saw that the closet door was wide open. I immediately felt that familiar uneasy feeling. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I couldn't. I stared into the darkness of the room, feeling more and more uncomfortable. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of a doll coming to life. My eyes widened as I saw my baby alive doll, which had been placed on a shelf, suddenly fall to the ground with a loud thud. The doll's eyes were closed, but it started to make noise. The sudden eerie sound made me tremble. With fear, I stared at the doll, my body frozen with terror. Then something even worse happened. As I continued to stare at the doll, I saw its eyes slowly open. It was as if the doll was looking at me, acknowledging my fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. I tried calling for my mom, but no sound came from my mouth. Finally, I managed to scream and ran out of my room straight into the hallway. I ran into the bathroom and locked the door behind me, sobbing uncontrollably. My mom eventually found me face red from crying. After that night, she never made me sleep in my room again. These events haunted me throughout my childhood, and even though I tried to forget them, the memories stayed with me. They left me with an eerie feeling about the house and the space I had once called my own. The unexplained noises, the old spots, and the disturbing experiences with my toys, especially the baby alive doll, made me feel like something unseen was living in my room with me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was wrong. As I grew older, I tried to rationalize these experiences, convincing myself they were just bad dreams or childhood imagination. But deep down, I never fully believed that explanation. There was something about those events, about the way the atmosphere in my room felt so off, that made me believe there was something more to the story, something beyond my understanding. And even today, I sometimes wonder what it was that haunted that house, watching me from the corners of my room, making me feel as though I was never truly alone. The first time something truly unexplainable happened to me, I was in secondary school. It was a normal morning, and like always, I was walking to school with my music playing, not paying much attention to my surroundings. As I stepped onto the road, I Suddenly heard my mother's voice clear as day, filled with shock and urgency, calling my name, and then shouting stop without even thinking. I froze in place, and at that exact moment a car sped past me so close that if I had taken even one more step it would have hit me directly. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around expecting to see my mum standing there behind me, but there was no one. I looked in every direction. Confused and shaken, I knew what I had heard. It wasn't muffled or distant. It was sharp and loud, like she had been standing just behind me, but she was nowhere to be seen when I got home later that day. I told her about it. Still trying to make sense of it, she listened carefully and then said she believed it was a guardian angel protecting me from harm. The thought of that was both unsettling and comforting at the same time, though. I couldn't explain what had happened. I never felt disturbed by it. If anything, I felt free because whatever it was, whoever it was, had saved my life that day. The second experience, however, was much stranger, and this time I wasn't alone. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but it was definitely during my secondary school years. It was early on a Saturday morning, and my brother and I were downstairs watching TV. He was sitting in a chair opposite the bay window, which had a clear view of our gravel driveway. I was sitting on the couch, also facing the window. Everything was normal until we both saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Our mat rolled down the driveway. We both saw it clearly, the unmistakable sight of our family car moving slowly down the gravel path, stopping as if someone had just pulled in for a moment. We didn't think much of it. I turned to my brother and asked, "Has Mum been out this morning? It's a bit early, isn't it?" He shrugged, looking just as puzzled as I was. He reasoned that maybe she had gone to a prayer meeting, but something about it didn't sit right. We both sat there waiting for her to come inside, but she never did. Minutes passed, and the front door remained closed. There were no sounds of movement outside, no car doors opening, no one was getting out. That's when we started feeling uneasy. We went to the window and looked out properly. The car was empty. At first we thought maybe she had already gone inside, but something didn't make sense. Feeling more and more unsettled, my brother decided to go outside to check. When he reached the car, he tried to open the passenger door, but it was locked. He tried the driver's side, also locked. I watched from the window, my stomach twisting in knots. Something wasn't right. I quickly ran to the kitchen, where my mum always left the car key in a bowl. I almost didn't want to look, but when I did, my blood ran cold. The key was right there. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and ran back to my brother, showing him. There was only one car key, and it was inside the house. And tear time, we both stood there looking at the locked car, then at each other. Mum wasn't outside. She hadn't been in the car. No one had. Without wasting another second, we rushed upstairs to our parents' room. To our complete shock, they were both still in bed, fast asleep. We woke them up immediately, practically shouting as we told them what had just happened, but they didn't believe us. They said we must have been dreaming, or that one of us had imagined it and convinced the other. But we hadn't. We knew what we saw. We saw the car. We saw it moving. Gay, we heard the gravel crunching under the tires. But now looking back, there's something I realized. That. But I hadn't thought about at the time. We never heard the engine, not once. A car can't drive without items engine running, but the entire time it was completely silent. To this day, my brother and I remember every detail of that morning. Years later, during a family trip to the Isle of Man, I brought it up Gayan just to see if his memory was as clear as mine. He immediately told me to stop talking about it, that it freaked him out too much. Even now, he doesn't like discussing it. We've told people over the years, but no one ever truly believes us. They think we must have imagined it, or somehow misremembered what happened, but we didn't. We both saw the same thing, we both heard the same sounds, and we both fell The same confusion and fear when we realized there was no explanation. Nothing like that has ever happened before or since, but it will always stay with us, one of those moments that defies logic, defies reason, and will likely never have an explanation. It happened when I was in my mid-teens, and even now I still don't know what I saw. The experience still lingers in my mind, and I've never been able to fully explain it. Two events, both of them occurring while I was asleep, or at least that's what I thought at the time. The first experience happened around midnight on what seemed like an ordinary night. I had fallen asleep with my TV on, nothing out of the ordinary, just another late evening, but something woke me up when I opened my eyes. The room was dark except for the dim flickering glow of the television. I turned to my right, and that's when I saw it. A white figure stood right next to my bed. It was tall and slim, eerily still, and completely featureless. Its arms weren't shaped like human arms. They were just straight like lines with no natural bends or curves. Its entire form was smooth and unnatural, and the strangest part was that it had no face. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me or not, but something about its posture made me feel like it was aware of me. At first I was groggy, disoriented, like waking up from anesthesia. My mind wasn't fully there and I struggled to focus, but as I did, I noticed something even more unsettling. It was wearing a hood draped over its head like a shadowy cloak. Every time I tried to focus on its details, its body would distort, turning into static, as if it were losing signal, like an old TV screen flickering out. It was as though it didn't want me to see it clearly, as if it was deliberately hiding something from me. Then it spoke. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew it was speaking to me. It was holding something in its right hand, something black, and it was trying to give it to me. It kept pushing it toward me, almost desperate for me to take it. Its voice became faster, more urgent, though I couldn't understand a single word. That's when I saw something that froze me completely. I turned my head slightly and saw myself lying on the floor. My breath caught in my throat. My body, my real body, was still in my dead, but somehow I could see myself on the ground, as if I were outside of it. I looked down at my hands. They were glowing, not bright, but with a faint white tint that separated them from the darkness of the room. The rest of my skin looked normal, but the glow, it was like my body was giving off some kind of energy. I turned my head back toward the figure, but it was gone. Then everything faded into darkness. I felt myself sinking, falling deeper, until suddenly I woke up. I was on the floor in the exact position I had seen myself. My entire body went cold. I sat there breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. Had I been dreaming? Had I actually left my body? What was the thing trying to give me, and what would have happened if I had taken it? I never got the answers, but that was the beginning of everything after that. I started seeing and hearing things I couldn't explain. The second experience happened much later, and it was even more terrifying. It was late, and I was lying in bed waiting to fall asleep, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was being watched. I remember that feeling so vividly, the heavy presence in the room, like 1,000 unseen eyes were locked onto me. Then I woke up. At first everything seemed normal, until I saw them. Dark figures stood at the foot of my bed. They were shadows, tall, human-like, but featureless. They had no eyes, no mouths, no expressions, just pure black silhouettes standing completely still in the dim light. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I threw myself out of bed, but the moment my feet hit the floor, pain hit me like a wave. Not physical pain, something worse. It was like every horrible emotion I could imagine crashed into me all at once. Grief, sorrow, hopelessness, death. I felt overwhelming despair, like I had lost everything, like life itself had no meaning. And the figures, they were laughing. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the room, low and echoing. I stepped forward, rage mixing with the fear inside me, and I focused on one of them. I don't know how, but I knew its name: suicide. I don't know why. I knew it. I don't know if it whispered it to me, or if something deep inside just understood. But the moment I acknowledged it, I felt the crushing weight of its presence bearing down on me. I lunged forward, trying to fight it, trying to push it away, but everything shifted instantly. I felt myself fall back into my body. I was lying in bed again, frozen. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then I felt it, a breath, cold, slow breathing, right next to my ear. Something was whispering to me, its voice low, almost playful, but I couldn't understand the words. I could feel its face right there, inches from. Mine just waiting. I tried to fight it, tried to open my eyes, tried to move, but I was paralyzed and it stopped just like that. I was free. I shot up from bed, gasping for air, but the room was empty. The air figures were gone. Ever since that first night, when I saw the white figure, things have followed me. I never asked for it. I never called upon anything. I don't live in an old haunted house, and I have a tragic past that would explain these encounters. My home was brand new when we moved in. I have never lost a close friend or family member, so whatever is trying to reach me, it's not someone I know now, and I don't think it ever wanted to be known. Ever since I was a child, I knew I was different. I just didn't understand how or why. I was afraid to talk about it for years, afraid people wouldn't believe me, or that they would think I was crazy. But the truth is simple. I see ghosts. It started when I was around 4 or 5 years old, though my memories from that time are hazy. The very first ghost I ever saw, or rather the first entity I ever encountered, was something beyond terrifying. Even now at 23, the memory of it still sends a chill down my spine. It was nighttime, probably around 9 o'clock. My brother and I shared a room back then, but that night I was alone. Maybe he was in the bath. I don't remember exactly. What I do remember is that my mum called me from another room. Maybe she was calling me for my bath too. I turned to leave, ready to go to her, but something stopped me. It wasn't a noise or a movement, it was a feeling. Something drew me back toward the window in my room. Even now, I can't explain it. It was like an invisible pull, something inside me urging me to go look. It didn't make sense, but I listened. Our windows had blinds, so in order to see outside, I had to pull the string to lift them. I should have never done that, because something was standing there. It was outside the window, staring directly at me. It was tall, taller than anything I'd ever seen, at least 9 or 10 feet. Its skin was pale, almost sickly white, stretched thin over its unnaturally long limbs. It had jet black, alien-shaped eyes, completely empty, and its body was draped in dark, loose clothing. The moment my eyes met it, I knew it wasn't human. We just stared at each other. I could tell it was shocked that I could see it. It didn't move, it didn't blink, it just watched me. But then, after what felt like an eternity, it raised hand and reached for me. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel that the glass between us wouldn't stop it. If it wanted to touch me, it could. That's where my memory cuts off. My mother later told me that I screamed and ran to her, refusing to go back to my room. She also said that from that night on, I wouldn't look out windows after dark, and I never wanted to sleep alone again. I slept in her bed for a long time after that, for years. I forgot that night until something brought the memory back, and then the encounters didn't stop. When I was around 5 years old, I woke up one night to see a little girl standing in my room. She had blonde hair and wore a white lacy dress. She wasn't scary, though. She looked at me and smiled, then asked if I wanted to play. I said yes. We played together for a while, sitting on my floor talking and laughing. But after some time, she stood up and said, "I have to go." Then she walked through the wall. She didn't fade or disappear. She physically walked through the wall like it was nothing. And for some reason, I wasn't scared. I just got up and went back to bed like it was normal. That's when I realized this was my normal. Over the years, I've seen everything: shadow figures, glowing red eyes, ghostly children laughing in empty rooms. I've heard whispers, felt cold spots, had objects thrown at me, or moved when I wasn't looking. One of the strangest experiences happened a few years ago, and to this day I don't know who or what visited me for 6 months straight. Something came to my room every night. I would be lying in bed, awake as usual. I've always had trouble sleeping, and suddenly I would feel the bed sink down beside me, like someone had just sat down. At first, I was too scared to move. I would look over expecting to see someone, but there was never anything there. It kept happening night after night, and eventually I started talking to it. I never got a response, not out loud at least, but I could hear thoughts in my head, responses that weren't my own. I don't know how I knew, but I was sure that it was a man. I don't think he meant to hurt me. He just wanted to be there. Over time, I grew comfortable with his presence. His visits became reassuring, almost comforting, and then one night he just stopped coming. I never saw him again. Even now, I still feel things no matter where I go. I sense presences, feel eyes on me when I'm alone, get sudden chills in places where the air should be warm. I don't know why, but it's always been this way. Some people have told me that I'm clairvoyant, that I have a natural connection to the supernatural. Others have called me psychic, but I don't claim to be either. I am just who I am. I've never asked for this, never tried to summon anything, never invited any of it into my life, and yet the supernatural has always found me. Does it still scare me? Of course. I don't think I'll ever stop being afraid, but I've come to accept that. I am a key to this world in ways that I may never understand. It was sometime around September or October of 2014 when I was staying at my mom's house in Missouri. This was my second time visiting in about a year. The house itself wasn't old or eerie, and there was never anything that made me feel uncomfortable. It was just another normal visit, at least that's what I thought. Before I get into what happened, I need to mention the dog. My mom and her boyfriend had a European boxer, about 2 years old at the time. He was a quiet, well-behaved dog, never barked unnecessarily, never growled. The only time he made any noise was when someone was playing with him, but other than that, he was just the kind of dog that lounged around without a care in the world. That day, it was around 3:00 p.m., and I was alone at home, waiting for my mom and her boyfriend to return from grocery shopping. She had just called me 2 minutes before it happened, telling me they were leaving Walmart and would be home in about 25 minutes, since Walmart was a 20-minute drive from the house. I knew I had plenty of time before they arrived. I was just sitting in my room getting ready to play a game on my laptop, waiting for it to load. The curtains were open, as were the lens in the bathroom, which faced the front yard and driveway. From my spot, I had a clear view of the house's entrance, which was always useful when I was expecting someone. Then suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. At that exact moment, the dog lost it. He started barking furiously, something he never did. His deep growling between the barking made my chest tighten. It wasn't just an alert bark, it was aggressive, defensive, like he was trying to scare something away. The footsteps didn't stop. I could clearly hear them moving into the kitchen, and then I heard cabinet doors opening and closing, dishes clanked. It was loud. Someone was rummaging through the kitchen, shifting things around as if they were looking for something. I sat there, frozen, just listening. My first instinct was to check if my mom had gotten home early, but when I looked out the window, the driveway was empty. There was no car. My second thought was even worse. An intruder. Someone had broken in. My pulse started racing as my mind ran through all the possibilities. Was I about to come face to face with a burglar? Was there someone in the house stealing something? I quickly grabbed my pocket knife from my desk and picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over 911, just in case, moving as quietly as possible. I crept toward my bedroom door. From there, I would have a clear view into the kitchen. I took a deep breath, then slowly pushed the door open and peeked out. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The house was completely silent. The dog, who had been barking uncontrollably just seconds ago, was now walking back into the living room, completely calm. I stood there, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. There was no way someone had left that fast. There were only 3 possible exits. One, the front door, which was down the hallway. If someone had run out that way, I would have seen them. 2, the back door, which was in my direct line of sight. No one had gone that way. 3, the garage door, which was impossible to open without making a loud squeaking sound. And yet whoever or whatever had been in the kitchen was just gone. I stepped further into the hallway, expecting to see something out of place, a chair pushed back, a cabinet left open, maybe something missing, but everything looked exactly as it should. Nothing had been moved. There was no sign of forced entry, no windows open. No way anyone could have come and gone without a trace. And yet I know what I heard: the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the sound of cabinets opening and closing, the sound of dishes shifting, and the dog barking like he was ready to defend the house against something unseen. It was unreal, but now standing in the silent house, I had to ask myself, was it really an intruder, or was it something else? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I didn't live in this house full time. I only visited for a couple of months at a time, so I had no idea if my mom or her boyfriend had ever noticed anything strange before. Was the house haunted? Had they ever heard strange noises, footsteps, or unexplained movements? Or was it just me? The strangest part, I never actually saw anything, I only heard it. That's what makes it even creepier. If I had seen an actual person, even a shadow, I could at least explain it away. But I didn't. There was nothing. And yet something had been there when my mom and her boyfriend finally arrived. I debated whether or not to tell them. Would they even believe me? There was no proof. Everything looked normal in the end. I decided to keep it to myself, but even now, years later, I still think about that day, because deep down I know what I heard, and whatever was in that house that afternoon wasn't supposed to be there. Since I was a child, I've always had a fascination with the paranormal. I don't recall experiencing anything strange when I was younger, but as a teenager and into adulthood, I've had more than a few moments that I can't explain. The first true experience I can pinpoint happened when I was 14 years old at a church camp in April 2001. It was a weekend that changed the way I saw the world, making me question everything I thought I believed in. I know wasn't the only one who saw things that weekend. Several others had their own terrifying encounters, but what I experienced was so undeniable that even if I had been a skeptic before, there was no way I could deny what happened. The camp lasted for 2 nights, Friday and Saturday, and we arrived on Friday afternoon, just before evening. The moment we got there, I knew this wasn't going to be like any other trip I had been on. Instead of settling in, we were not allowed to enter the dorms or even take our bags inside until a cleansing ritual was performed. The church leaders told us that before we could stay there, we had to purify the space. They gathered everyone into a large hall where we were told to close our eyes. Under no circumstances were we allowed to open them. One of the leaders began saying a prayer, and then a deep, almost eerie horn blew through the air, lasting for what felt like forever. At first I obeyed the rule, but my curiosity got the best of me. Just for a second, I opened one eye ever so slightly, and what I saw has haunted me ever since. Tiny black shadows, countless in number, rushed out of the hall. Some darted through the open doors, others squeezed through the windows, and even more skewered up the walls, escaping through the windows at the top. It was as if something dark and unnatural had been forced out of the building. If I hadn't been afraid of getting caught, I would have kept watching, but I quickly shut my eye again and pretended like nothing had happened at the time. I assumed these were negative energies being expelled, but looking back, I wonder, was there something else in that hall that they needed to cleanse so badly? Later that night after dinner, my friend and I decided to explore the campgrounds. We had been given a tour during the day, but there were horses on the knock. When nother were the Mackinath, when were the Macca happy, and we wanted to find them. As we walked toward where we thought the stables were, we passed a small football field enclosed by a fence. That's when we noticed something strange. A man stepped out of a building next to the field. That wouldn't have been odd except for one detail. He walked straight through the wall. There was no door, no entrance, just a solid wall, but he passed right through it as if it wasn't even there. He was dressed in all white, almost like Sunday best church clothes, and he looked incredibly pale, nearly glowing in the dim light. The only color on him was a small red mark near his mouth, almost as if he had been smoking. We stood frozen as he walked across the wide path in front of us. Then, without warning, he stopped, turned his head, and looked directly at us. The second his eyes met ours, my whole body went cold. I could feel a weight pressing down on me, as if something unseen had wrapped itself around my chest. My friend must have felt it too, because she grabbed my arm. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned away and continued walking. We didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as he walked toward the other side of the path, where he disappeared completely, not behind anything, not into the trees, just vanished. The moment he reached the fence, we stood there for a second, both of us trying to process what we had just seen. We didn't say a word, just turned around and walked in the opposite direction, deciding that we'd had enough of the mystery man. We wandered toward the small lake on the property. It was beautiful, with a wooden gazebo on a tiny island connected by a pathway through the trees. It felt peaceful until we saw something even worse than the white man. At first we thought it was a group of people standing in a circle just talking, but as we got closer we saw the candles, the strange hand movements, and the way they were chanting. The language was completely unfamiliar, but it sent a deep, awful feeling straight through my stomach. This wasn't just a group of people hanging out by the lake, it was a seance. The group was completely focused, not noticing us, but we didn't wait to find out what they were doing or who or what they were trying to contact. My friend and I turned and ran as fast as we could back to the dorms, but the chaos wasn't over. When we got back, the first thing we saw was one of the girls in tears, shaking so badly that the counselors had to hold her down. She was crying uncontrollably, pointing toward her window, sobbing about the green man with worms in his hair. I was a commerce student in 2008. Studying at Kampu University near Kangal, Ramnagar, a place better known as Ramgarh from the Bollywood movie Kale. I had leased a 2-bark house there during my graduation. The area was rural, and people held strong traditional beliefs and superstitions, especially about ghosts. Coming from Bangalore, a well-developed city, I was somewhat of a novelty among my classmates. They found my city life fascinating, and soon I had made a few good friends. They often visited my house, partly for studies, but mostly because I had a computer, a rare thing in homes. When I opened my eyes, the sunlight had washed away the terror of the night, but the memory did not fade. Even now, years later, I can still remember every single detail of that night. The man who moved too fast, the way he kept appearing and disappearing, the feeling of unseen hands on my shoulder, and the way he vanished into the darkness, as if he had never existed at all. The Pennsylvania countryside had always carried an eerie weight, a presence that lingered in the air. It wasn't completely isolated, but it felt that way. The land stretched on endlessly, filled with abandoned barns, collapsing silos, and long forgotten farmland overtaken by weeds. Our family friends lived there, surrounded by vast emptiness. There were only a dicky few scattered houses, and much of the land was filled with dead corn stalks and an abandoned tree farm. A creek cut through the landscape, winding past the bike trail that barely saw any travelers. I never felt at ease when I was there. Something about the land made my skin crawl, like I was being watched. Even when I was alone, it wasn't just the feeling of an old house carrying its past with it. This was different, darker. I have always believed in ghosts, but I also believe in things far worse. Some places carry a presence that isn't just restless, but something deeper, something dangerous. My mother and sister felt it too, though none of us ever spoke about it until much later. It was only then that we admitted what we all had suspected. Something evil roamed that land. There were stories, whispers, of the land once belonging to a Native American tribe. Some said there had been burial grounds left undisturbed, but still carrying the weight of the past. It wasn't hard to believe. The ground itself seemed unwilling to let go of whatever had happened there. The creek in particular always seemed to have a life of its own. I have always been drawn to creeks. There's something peaceful about watching water flow, catching glimpses of frogs leaping from the banks, listening to the rustling of leaves carried by the current. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where nothing could reach me. So Naturally, I spent a lot of time there. There was a footbridge that stretched over the water part of the bike trail. It wasn't well used. Most people took the main road. Instead, one afternoon, I was crouched near the water's edge, trying to catch a fishing spider, when a splash startled me. A rock had hit the surface, landing just inches from where I knelt. I looked up, expecting to see my sister or one of her friends standing on the bridge above, laughing at their prank, but there was no one there. The bridge was empty. The air around me suddenly felt. The creek had gone silent, the usual sounds of water and insects drowned out by an overwhelming stillness. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was probably just a loose rock that had naturally fallen from the bridge. Then another rock hit the water, but this time it didn't just land nearby, it flew past me, so close that I felt the air shift as it moved before it splashed into the creek. Something was throwing them, and it was aiming for me. I stood up immediately, heart pounding, scanning the area. There was nothing, no movement, no footsteps, no sound at all. The weight of the silence pressed against me, making it harder to breathe. I backed away, forcing myself not to run, but every instinct was screaming at me to leave. As I made my way back to the house, I followed a narrow dirt path that ran parallel to the creek. There were weeds and wildflowers lining the edges, but nothing dense enough for anything to hide in. Probably the largest thing that could fit in there was a small rabbit. That's when I heard it, a deep, guttural growl, low and drawn out, vibrating through the air. It wasn't the sound of any animal I had ever heard before. It was too deep for a dog, too unnatural to be anything I could place. The sound was right beside me, coming from the empty space beyond the path. I froze. The air around me felt odor, heavy in a way that made it difficult to move. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body ski-reamed at me to run, but I couldn't make myself turn my back to whatever was there. Slowly, I forced myself to move forward step by step, feeling as if something was right behind me, breathing down my neck. As soon as the house came into view, I ran. When I finally burst through the front door, gasping for Reith, my mother, looked at me with concern. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth. A rock-throwing ghost, an invisible growling creature. Even as I said, I could hear how absurd it sounded. She listened quietly, then shook her head. "You probably startled. A raccoon," she said, "or maybe a fox, but I had seen nothing there. Had been nowhere for an animal that essays to hide, and no raccoon could have thrown her." I never went to that creek alone again. A few weeks later, I learned I wasn't the only one who had experienced something strange near the water. Someone else who lived nearby shared a story. She and her sibling had gone down to the creek late at night with a video camera, hoping to catch something unexplained on tape. They described seeing a mist rise from the water, not like normal fog drifting with the wind, but something deliberate. It curled and twisted in unnatural ways, moving toward them as if it was aware of their presence. They caught everything on film, or so they thought. When the footage was played back, their reactions were clearly visible. Their voices could be heard describing what they saw, but the mist itself, the strange, purposeful fog, was gone. The camera had captured the sounds, the setting, even their fear, but not the thing itself. It was like whatever they had seen didn't want to be recorded, as if it existed only in the space between the seen and the unseen. That was just one of many strange experiences in that place. In time, more became noticeable. Shadows that moved when no one was there, footsteps in the hallway at night, the feeling of being watched no matter where one went. Then came the dream, or maybe something more than that. One night, consciousness returned suddenly. The body refused to move, pinned in place by something invisible, eyes wide open in the dark, but unable to sit up, call out, or even flinch. Something stood at the edge of vision, close, but just out of reach. Then the whispering began. A soft, strange voice slithered through the air. The words weren't clear, but the tone felt wrong. Not gentle, not friendly. It sounded like it was mocking, laughing, feeding off fear. With sudden effort, the paralysis broke. The lights were switched on in a flash. The room was empty. But the feeling lingered heavy. Watchful sleep never came easy in that place again. Years later, there was another story, this time from a family home passed down across generations. The old house had been built in the early 20th century, surrounded by thick trees and crafted in a traditional circular style. It stood in a neighborhood filled with similar homes, where stories never truly faded, and giant trees, neem, banyan, tamarind, cast shadows even at noon. Next door, a quiet older couple lived. Their daughter had once been a local legend, a girl known for her haunting beauty and singing voice. Her long hair had reached her knees, and her laughter echoed through the neighborhood during her childhood. But her life had ended in heartbreak. She fell in love with someone her family disapproved of, pressured into a future she didn't want. She reached a breaking point. One night, in an act of despair, she ended her life in the backyard where she'd once played beneath the trees. After her death, the stories began. Some said her shadow moved among the trees late at night. Others claimed to hear her voice, still singing the way she had in life. A few neighbors saw her swinging gently on the old rope swing, her long hair drifting in the moonlight breeze. She had become a part of the neighborhood itself, a presence rooted deep in its soil, impossible to forget. Years later, when a mother and daughter returned to live in that house during a suffocatingly hot summer, they left the doors and windows open, hoping for a breeze. Room like all the others in the house faced the open veranda. It was around midnight when my sister stirred. A light breeze brushed her face, and half-conscious, she opened her eyes and she saw it a shadow at the foot of her bed at first. Her mind struggled to make sense of it, but as she focused, her breath caught in her throat. A woman stood there, no floated, her long dark hair flowed wildly around. Her eyes burned with an unnatural intensity, and her mouth twisted into a grin, revealing sharp, elongated teeth. She wore a black ankle-length gown that seemed to hover just above the floor, and then she laughed, a deep, hollow laugh that echoed in the silent room. My sister tried to move, to scream, to wake my mother, but her body refused to listen. The girl in black stood still for a moment before slowly gliding closer, her laughter growing louder, her sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. Then my mother woke up, still grieving, still fragile from my father's death. She was in no state to face something like this. The sight of the floating woman drained the color from her face. Her body froze in terror, her breath shallow. The figure did not falter. It continued moving toward them, its laughter ringing through the room like a taunt. Desperate, my sister closed her eyes and forced herself to pray. In Hindu belief, Lord Hanuman is a protector, a force against all evil. With every ounce of strength she had left, she began reciting the Hanuman Kalisa under her breath. At first the laughter continued, then it wavered. The air in the room shifted, and suddenly the apparition was gone. The room fell into silence. The only sound left was my mother's ragged breathing. Moments later, my grandfather, hearing the commotion, rushed in and turned on the lights. He found them both drenched in sweat, trembling, their faces pale, as if they had just escaped death itself. The next morning, my grandmother wasn't surprised. She sighed, shaking her head, and told them what they already knew but had never fully believed. Imishti never left. It had been 20 years since she had died, but she still wandered the neighborhood, still haunted the trees where she had spent her childhood. And Red One knew the rule: no matter how hot the summers got, no matter how still the air became, he never left the doors or windows open after dark, because when night fell, Mishi walked again, and if you listened closely in the quietest hours, you could still hear the creak of the old swing in her backyard, swaying back and forth as though she was still there waiting. I've lived in the same house since I was about 4 or 5, and now at 19 I finally understand what's been happening there all these years. For most of my life, my bedroom was upstairs, close to the rest of my family, but about a year and a half ago, I moved downstairs to the guest bedroom. The room was bigger, quieter, and gave me more privacy, but it was also the same room that had always made me uneasy growing up. I used to joke that it was haunted. The long, dark hallway leading to it always gave me the creeps. Something about that space felt off like the air was heavier there, like it was holding on to something unseen. The first real incident happened one night while I was trying to fall asleep. I was still awake, just lying there in the dark, when I heard it clear as day, right next to my ear, a camera shutter. Click, it was loud, distinct, and way too close to have come from anywhere else in the house. My body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just lay there paralyzed by fear, listening to the silence that followed. There was no one in the room with me, but I could feel something watching, waiting. A few nights later, it happened again. This time it was the sound of someone clearing their throat, deep, unmistakable, and right next to my bed. I felt the same terror seized my body, the same paralysis, like if I moved, whatever it was would know I was awake. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. There was something in that room with me. Months passed, and I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it wasn't real. Then one night, I woke up, freezing, not just a little cold, but shivering, teeth chattering cold, like I had been dropped into a snowstorm. I was half asleep, so I assumed I must have left my window open. I sat up to close it, but the window was already shut. No draft. No reason for the sudden drop in temperature. I pulled my blankets tighter around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At this point, I finally told my mom everything I needed someone to believe me, to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. She listened, nodded, and told me to pray, that there wasn't much else to do. She didn't dismiss it, but she didn't try to fix it either. That was the moment I realized I was on my own with this. Then came the footsteps. It was late, around 4 o'clock. A meme. I was still up, browsing the internet, watching TV, waiting for my stepdad to wake up so I could go to the bathroom. I hated going to the downstairs bathroom at night. It was small and pitch black, and I couldn't stand being alone in there. I always waited until I heard my stepdad's footsteps before heading up to use the main bathroom. That night I heard them, loud, distinct, moving across the floor above me. I finally felt safe enough to go upstairs, but when I got up there, all the lights were off. The kitchen light, which my stepdad always turned on in the mornings, was still dark. Confused, I peeked into my parents' room. They were both there, sound asleep, snoring. That's when I heard it, footsteps, this time coming from the roof. I didn't look. I ran straight back downstairs, heart pounding, dove under my bed covers, and squeezed my eyes shut like a child, trying to block out the monster under the bed. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, waiting, listening, but the house was silent again. I told my boyfriend about everything. He didn't believe me. He rolled his eyes, laughed it off, said ghosts weren't real, and that I was just scaring myself. He was so sure that none of it was real until he saw it for himself. One evening, he was hanging out in my room while I went upstairs to use the bathroom. I was in there for maybe a minute before I heard him sprinting up the stairs. He pounded on the door, his voice urgent, frantic. When I opened the door, his face was pale. He told me that while I was gone, the hangers on my clothes rack suddenly started swinging, not just a little movement, but violently, like someone had walked by and knocked into them. A few even fell to the floor. The terror in his eyes said it all. He had seen it, he had felt it, and for the first time he believed me. That was the last major incident before I finally moved out. I've got less than a week left in this house, and I've never been more relieved to leave. Whatever is down here, whatever has been watching me, whispering in my ear, clicking cameras that aren't there, playing tricks with the temperature, and pacing the floor above me, it can have this room, it can have this house. I just hope it doesn't follow me. When we decided to renovate parts of our ancestral home, we knew it would be a big project. These sections had been left untouched in previous reconstructions, standing firm for generations. But after the recent earthquakes, which had been shaking our northern province and sending aftershocks that felt like underground trains roaring beneath our feet, we had no choice but to strengthen the structure. With construction underway, parking at our home became impossible, so we made arrangements with a nearby hospital. The officials granted us permission to park in a designated area separate from the regular hospital parking to avoid any extra charges. It seemed convenient at first, but as I spent more time there, I started to notice something odd. The parking area was isolated compared to the rest of the hospital grounds. It was a shaded spot about 40 times 40 ft, bordered by a wall with 4 evenly spaced windows opening into the hospital building. A small unkempt garden lay nearby, but there was very little human activity in this section. Even the hospital staff seemed to avoid it, rarely walking through the area. Unless absolutely necessary, a short distance from the parking lot stood a small 2-room house detached from the hospital's main structure. It had a locked gate, and all its windows were tightly shut. There were no signs indicating its purpose, but something about it gave me an unsettling feeling. After a few days, I pieced together that this building was once used as a morgue, a place where bodies were kept before being handed over to their families. It had long been abandoned. Everything changed on the evening of June the 13th, 2015. That Saturday, I returned from work later than usual. As I parked my car and stepped out, I suddenly heard the laughter of small children playing nearby. The sound was strange, bright, cheerful voices echoing in a place that was always silent. I froze for a moment, trying to place where it was coming from. My ears led me to the last of the 4 windows, the 4th one, which belonged to the hospital administration office. It was already past 7 in the evening, and I knew the office closed by then. The window was covered with an iron mosquito net, but the glass panes were open. Peering inside, I switched on my torch to scan the dark room. There was nothing, just an empty space. Confused, I turned to leave, but then I heard the same laughter again. This time it was coming from the 2nd window. The voices were louder, now unmistakable. My heart pounded as I stepped cautiously towards the 2nd window and looked inside again. Nothing. A cold uneasiness crept up my spine. My body tensed as I bent down to pick up the things I had set on the ground, and then I felt it, something tugging at my trouser leg. Panic surged through me. My hands trembled as I frantically searched the area around me. No one was there. I knew in that instant that this was not human. This was something else, something that should not have been there. I grabbed my belongings hastily, but just as I turned, my eyes locked onto 2 figures standing near the locked morgue. 2 children. Their forms were dimly illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlight, and then right before my eyes they moved without opening the gate. They slipped through the metal bars and disappeared inside. For a long moment I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to move. It was as if I had been hypnotized, trapped in the grip of something beyond my understanding. Then one of them turned towards me and let out a scream, an ear-piercing, blood-curdling wail that seemed to vibrate through my skull. The sound was so unbearable, so unnatural, that I thought my eardrums would burst. I don't remember how, but somehow I broke free from the paralysis of terror and ran. My feet barely touched the ground as I bolted from that place, leaving behind everything I had been carrying. I didn't stop running until I was safely home the next morning. I returned with my brother in daylight. The place looked ordinary, too ordinary. My things were still there, untouched, waiting for me, as if nothing had happened. I told my brother everything. He listened carefully, nodding, as I described each terrifying detail. We didn't say much after that, but we both knew what needed to be done. That same day, we made arrangements to park our car elsewhere. We never returned to that haunted parking lot. Thinking back, I now understand why the area was always so deserted, why even the hospital staff avoided it. The place was haunted, and those children, whoever they were, whatever they were, I had no desire to find out more. I had already dealt with one spirit in my life, a relentless female entity that had disturbed me for months. I had barely managed to rid myself of her presence. Using Rook's cleansing methods, I wasn't about to invite another unwanted guest into my life. Some things are better left unknown. It all started about 8 or 9 years ago. At first I didn't want to take it seriously. I told myself it was just my imagination, just one of those weird moments that happen when you're half asleep. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. It always happened, late at night, sometimes even in the early hours of the morning. I've always been a light sleeper and a night owl, staying up late when everything is quiet. That's why the first time it happened, I was still awake, lying in bed waiting to fall asleep. Just as I was reaching that half dream, half awake state, I suddenly felt a horrible gut wrenching feeling that someone was standing in the doorway of my room. Not just standing, staring, watching me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just unease, it wasn't just paranoia, it was pure evil, an overwhelming, suffocating sensation of something dark and malevolent looming over me. I don't get scared and silly, but this fear, it wasn't normal, it was overpowering. It felt like something was creeping closer to me, feeding off my fear, enjoying it. The presence was gloating, mocking me. I kept trying to reason with myself. It's all in your head. You're tired, you're sleep deprived, just ignore it. But no matter how much I rationalized it, the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it felt stronger. It felt like whatever was standing there was trying to get into me. I fought against it, refusing to give in to fear. I forced myself to chant in my head, repeating logical thoughts, trying to push it away, and then just as suddenly as it came, it was gone. In the morning, I still felt uneasy, but I convinced myself it was just a bad dream, that is, until it happened again. And this time, I wasn't the only one who experienced it. One night, I had a few friends over. We weren't drunk or anything, just hanging out, having fun. One of my friends decided to stay over instead of driving home. We both fell asleep in the living room, her on one side of the couch, me on the other. That night it returned, the exact same presence, the same overwhelming, suffocating evil, the same feeling of being watched. But this time it wasn't just watching me, it was watching both of us. The fear hit me instantly, just like before. I felt the entity standing at the door, its malice filling the room, creeping closer. But this time I was determined not to give in. I turned my back to the presence, refusing to acknowledge it. I forced myself to act like it wasn't there, and eventually, after what felt like hours, it left. The next morning, my friend looked just as disturbed as I felt. We both mentioned how awful the night was, and then she said something that sent chills through me. I don't know why, but I felt so scared last night. She said like something was watching us, and whatever it was angry. I was stunned. If this was all in my head, if it was just a nightmare, then why did she experience the exact same thing? She refused to ever stay over at my place again. Was convinced my home was haunted. I, on the other hand, became more intrigued. I started researching, trying to find explanations. I read about sleep paralysis, but there was one big problem. I was never paralyzed. I could move freely every single time. It happened for years. It continued till then suddenly it stopped. I moved abroad for 5 years, and during that time, I never felt anything like that again. No fear, no presence, nothing. I began to think it was all in my imagination, after all. But when I returned home this year, the nightmare started again. The very first night back in my apartment, I could feel something was off. I was lying in bed, facing the wall, trying to fall asleep. The door to my room was open, leading to the living room. At first it was just a feeling, a strange, uneasy sensation that someone was standing in my living room, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it, the sound of claws tapping against the wooden floor. It was fast, like a dog trotting across the room toward me. I froze. My heart started pounding. I had lost my dog years ago, but the sound was unmistakable. Something was running across the living room, heading straight for me, and then it jumped onto my bed. I felt it land. The mattress dipped slightly, just like it would if a small dog had jumped onto it. I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I just lay there, back turned, praying it would go away. But then the real terror started. That thing was back, the same evil presence, but stronger than before. It was angry, furious, and it was coming straight toward me. I could feel it, its hunger, I feel it pressing closer, breathing down my neck. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. My body was covered in goosebumps, my heart racing. I didn't know what it wanted, but it wanted something. I forced myself to stay calm. I refused to let it control me, so I did. The only thing I could think of, I waved my hand dismissively and muttered, "Go away, enough," and just like that it vanished. I should have felt relieved, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. And I was right. Just a week ago, it happened again. Late at night, me lying in bed, facing the wall, trying to sleep, and then it was there. I didn't need to see it, I could feel it, and this time it was even worse. It wasn't just watching me, it was trying to get inside my head. I could feel its presence pressing against me stronger than ever before. And then I heard it, a buzzing sound. Not like bees, it was more mechanical, electric, like a low hum vibrating through the air. Was surrounding me like some kind of static charge. I could feel it pushing against my mind, trying to invade me for the first time. I truly panicked. I shot up, turned on the light, and of course nothing was there, but I knew it had been, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of the dark. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. I don't know what this thing is or what it wants from me, but it's getting stronger and it's not going away. Our trip to Pakari in Madhya Pradesh was supposed to be a simple getaway, something to cheer me up after our much-anticipated 18-day vacation to China was cancelled. I was upset, and my family, my parents, my husband, and my baby boy decided that a short trip would lift my spirits. We planned to stay for 4 days from February the 15th to February the 18th and drove from Nagpur in our own car. The journey took about 6 hours, but we weren't in a rush, stopping frequently along the way. By the time we reached the guest house, it was already dark. Around 7:00 p.m. The place was a typical Madhya Pradesh Tourism Development Corporation guest house spread over a vast area with separate double-room cottages that stood far apart. There was an open space in the middle, making everything feel even more isolated. The rooms were at a distance from each other, so much so that to get to my parents' room we had to walk almost 100 meters. It was the first time my baby had traveled such a long distance, and naturally he was exhausted after settling in. We went out for dinner and returned around 10:00 p.m. The moment we got back, my baby showed signs of being sleepy. I thought he would drift off immediately once I laid him down, wrapped in a warm blanket, but to my surprise he didn't. My husband, who was extremely tired from driving, fell asleep instantly, leaving me alone with our restless child. I tried everything I could to soothe him. I laid him on the bed, rocked him in my lap, and rattled him in my arms, but nothing worked. As time passed, he became more and more uneasy. He kept glancing at the corner where the TV was placed, holding on to me tighter each time. His fear was real. He wasn't just being fussy or cranky. He would stare at that corner, then quickly bury his face in my chest as if trying to hide. I had never seen him behave like this before. His little hands clung to my clothes, his body tense, and no matter how much I whispered reassuring words to him, he refused to settle down. The night grew colder and his behavior worsened. It reminded me of how animals react when they sense a predator, alert, jumpy, desperate to escape. I had no idea what was making him so uncomfortable. The more he looked at the more uneasy I became myself. The room felt heavier, as if something was watching us. The air was thick, making it harder to breathe. By the time it was 1:30 a.m., something happened that made my blood run cold. My son, in his small voice, suddenly screamed the word boot. The word meant ghost, and I knew for a fact that no one had ever used that word in front of him before. I was always very particular about the words spoken around my child. We never watched horror movies, never discussed anything remotely supernatural, and I had never left him alone with anyone who might have taught him that word. Yet there he was, clutching me, eyes wide with terror, repeating it over and over again. I tried to distract him, but he wouldn't stop. A few moments later, he cried out another word, kaka in India. We Use this word to refer to an older man like an uncle. Then, after a short pause, he whispered another word, deed, which meant an elder girl. My heart started pounding. He was pointing at the same corner of the room where the TV stood. Then he buried his face into my chest as if trying to hide from something unseen. My entire body tensed up, my pulse racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I shook my husband, whispering his name at first, then calling out louder, but he didn't stir normally. He was such a light sleeper that even the faintest noise would wake him up. But now, even with my son crying loudly, he remained unresponsive. It was as if he was in a deep, unnatural sleep. I tried shaking him harder, but he didn't move. That's when I realized I was completely alone in that moment. My baby, still terrified, was pointing again, this time at the ceiling. Then he pointed lower, as if whatever he was seeing was moving closer. His little finger traced an invisible path from the ceiling to the side of the bed, and then he pointed right next to me. I felt my heart stop. He jumped, scrambling away, trying to climb over me toward his father's side of the bed, his whole body trembling. I could see the terror in his eyes. He wasn't imagining this. Whatever he saw, it was real to him. At least I didn't know what to do. I was too afraid to leave the room and go to my parents. It was too dark outside, and I was already terrified beyond words. My only option was to fight whatever was in the room with us, summoning every ounce of courage I had. I did something that in hindsight I still don't fully understand. I started shouting at whatever was there. I raised my voice and demanded that it leave us alone. I told it I wasn't afraid, even though my body was shaking uncontrollably. I even told my son to hit the air in that direction, to push whatever it was away. At first, he hesitated, his tiny hands clinging to me, but after I encouraged him again, he swung his arms through the air. I didn't know where my bravery came from, but I felt an overwhelming need to protect my baby. No matter what, I started chanting the name of Hanumanji, our protector, over and over again. My voice grew louder, more desperate. My body was drenched in sweat, but I refused to stop. For nearly 20 minutes, I kept chanting, kept fighting back. And then, just like that, the heaviness started to lift the air in the room felt lighter. My son, though still clinging to me, finally started to calm down. By 5 o'clock, he had fallen asleep, his small hands gripping my clothes. I held him tightly, refusing to let go. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. When I told my husband what had happened, he looked at me in disbelief. He had no memory of the night before. He had slept through everything. Later that day, while we were out sightseeing, we received news that my maternal aunt's husband had passed away. It had nothing to do with our experience, but the timing unsettled me. That night, my mother decided to stay in my room. Sensing my unease, my baby once again showed the same behavior, staring at the corners, refusing to sleep. But this time, my mother walked around the room, chanting prayers. Eventually, he calmed down and fell asleep, though much later than usual, even after we returned home. I couldn't shake off the fear. My son continued to show signs that worried me. Sometimes he would stare at a particular spot in a room, completely focused, as if watching something move. Other times he would talk when no one was there. He was only 2 years old too. Yang to explain what he was seeing. I started wondering if he was truly sensitive to the paranormal. Could he see things that we couldn't, or was it something else? I have heard that some people believe babies, especially those born in certain months, have a heightened sensitivity to such things he was born in. Could that mean something even now? I don't have an answer. I don't know if I should be worried or if this is something all babies experience, but one thing is for sure: whatever happened that night, it wasn't just in my imagination. It was real, and I don't think I will ever forget it. We had been living in a rented cottage, part of the old servants' quarters of a grand manor house in West Sex, England. Since January, the cottage was small, only 2 bedrooms, but its history was impossible to ignore. The entire house carried the weight of time inside. The stone steps had been worn down by centuries of footsteps. The fireplaces, one in the living room and another in the master bedroom directly above it, were beautiful but unsettling. Those were the 2 places where we always felt the most uneasy from the moment we moved. In strange things began happening. My boyfriend James, who had never sleepwalked before, suddenly developed a habit of getting out of bed in the middle of the night, wandering around the house. It was always at the same time, around 3 o'clock or 4 in the morning. At first I thought it was harmless, just a new quirk, but then I started noticing something strange. When I tried to guide him back to bed, he would sometimes act distant, even rude, which was completely out of character for him. The next morning he would have no memory of these incidents. Even eerier, there were nights when he would reach out and feel my face with his hands, almost as if he was making sure I was real. It disturbed me deeply. We decided to use a sleep talking app to record his nighttime episodes. It was supposed to capture any noises or speech while we slept, but every time James sleepwalked, the app failed to record anything at all. It never caught his movements, never recorded his voice, only strange buzzing sounds and the occasional creaking of the bed. Even on nights when James distinctly remembered waking up and talking to me, the recordings were always empty. One night, after a particularly disturbing episode, we agreed that it might be safer for James to sleep downstairs. He was too restless at night, and I needed a full night's sleep, so he took a blanket and sat up on the couch while I stayed in our bedroom alone. The room was dark, silent, and I had just turned off the light when I heard it, a soft, breathy whisper right by my face. "Good night." The voice was low, almost satisfied. I froze, my heart pounding. The sound was so close, as if someone was lying right next to me, whispering into my ear. But there was no one there. I sat up quickly and turned on the light, my stomach churning with unease. I wanted to believe that James had said it from downstairs and that somehow the sound had carried up through the chimney. But when we tested it the next morning, we realized that was impossible. The only way I could have heard something that clearly was if someone had been right next to me. Since then, both of us felt a growing discomfort in the house. It was subtle, at first feeling like we were being watched, sensing a presence behind us, hearing faint sounds we couldn't explain, but nothing truly terrifying happened until last night. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw James standing at the foot of the bed. His posture was stiff, his body tense, as if he was preparing for something. It looked like he was staring straight at me. My first thought was that he was sleepwalking again. So I groggy said, "James, come on now. It's the middle of the night. Get back into bed." Then I reached out to sit up, and my hand brushed against something, an arm beside me. James was still in bed right next to me. A wave of sheer terror crashed over me as I realized what that meant. If James was here, then who was standing at the foot of our bed? I gasped, my breath catching in my throat as panic overtook me. James woke up instantly as I started to scream. What's wrong?" he yelled, grabbing me as I shook violently. My eyes were locked on the figure in front of us. It had started to move. It raised its hands slowly, a calming gesture, almost like it was trying to reassure me. Its head tilted to the side, shaking slightly. The movement was unnatural, almost as if it was trying to mimic a human's mannerisms, but didn't quite know how. The closer it moved, the more my fear grew. I was screaming, yelling at James over and over again. "Turn the light on, turn the light on, turn the light on." I fumbled wildly for the switch, my fingers trembling, my body frozen in terror. Just as I finally found it and flipped the switch, I tore my eyes away for a split second. When I looked back, the figure was gone. We sat there in stunned silence, the bedroom now brightly lit, our breaths coming in shaky gasps. Neither of us slept much after that. We kept the lights on for the rest of the night, anxiety coming in waves. At some point, James whispered that before I had woken up, he had been lying there, staring into the darkness with a sickening feeling that something was crouched in the corner of the room, watching us. He hadn't seen anything, but the sensation had been so strong that he had forced himself to roll over and close his eyes, trying to shake off the fear. And then just minutes later, I woke up and saw it. We don't know what to do every night now. We Dread going to bed, we both feel like something is waiting for us, waiting for the right moment to be seen. We've begun questioning everything. Was something trying to separate us at night? Was it influencing James, making him sleepwalk? Was it trying to lure him away from me? And what's more terrifying, have there been nights when I thought I was seeing James sleepwalking, but in reality, I was seeing something else. The summer I turned hen was one I would never forget. That year I spent my vacation working for my grandfather, though calling it work might have been a stretch. He was retired by then, but he had spent his life doing whatever it took to provide for his family. He had been a soldier in World War I, a farmer, a mechanic, a carpenter, a salesman, and a general handyman. There wasn't much he couldn't do. He and my grandmother lived in a small house in Mineral Wells, Texas, a house that my dad, and my uncles had built with their own hands. It sat on a 10-acre plot of land covered with fruit trees and garden plots, with a small man-made pond just outside the kitchen window. The house itself was simple: a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. One belonged to Granny and Granddad, and that room was strictly off limits to us grandkids. The other was a tiny guest room, the one I was staying in that summer. It wasn't anything special, but for some reason it never felt quite right to me. Maybe it was the way it always seemed a little darker than the rest of the house, or maybe it was just the quietness that made it feel different. That summer, my job was to help Granddad with a new project. Someone had given him an old house, under one condition: if he tore it down and hauled away the materials, he could keep whatever he salvaged. So my dad and uncles got to work dismantling it, and all the wood was stacked in Granddad's back lot. He planned to use it to build a workshop, guest house, a place where his kids and grandkids could stay when they visited. My role in all of this: pulling and straightening nails, sorting through the piles of wood. Summers in Texas are brutal, and Granddad liked to get up before the sun to start working. While it was still cool outside, he'd wake me up early and we'd have breakfast. Granny always had it ready for us before heading out to work. We'd keep going until around 10 o'clock, when Granddad figured it was too hot to continue. Then we'd go inside, cool off, have lunch, maybe take a nap or play dominoes or cards. In the evening, when the sun started to set, we'd head back out and work some more. One morning I woke up before Granddad came to get me. That was unusual. I was used to hearing his voice, calling me a lazy bones or a slug, a bit as he tried to drag me out of bed. But this time I woke up on my own, and I had the strangest feeling that he was already there, standing in the room, staring at me. Lay there for a while, waiting for him to tease me like he always did, but he didn't say a word. Something felt off. Finally, I opened my eyes. The room was brighter than it should have been, as if the sun was shining straight through the windows, filling every corner with light. I barely had time to register this, when suddenly a deep booming voice filled the room, yelling, "UP, you're dead." Then a blinding explosion of light, and just as suddenly as it had appeared, everything went completely dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body frozen in terror. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. My mind raced. Holy crap, I'm dead. This is it. I actually died. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear, convinced that I was no longer alive, but it felt like an eternity. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think straight. Then all at once the door swung open. Granddad walked in, flipped on the light, and barked, "Quit burning daylight." And just like that, the world was back to normal. I was still in my bed. The room looked the same as it always had. The sun was just beginning to rise outside, sending a faint golden glow through the window. I was alive. I wasn't dead. It had to have been a dream, a terrible, terrifying dream. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself for the next couple of days. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong with that room. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask Granddad if anything weird had ever happened in the house. He barely looked up from what he was doing and just muttered, "Don't worry about it." Then he changed the subject. I asked Granny instead. She just shook her head and said she didn't understand what I was talking about. Then she changed the subject too. The way they reacted so quickly, so dismissive, made me believe they did know something. Maybe something had happened there before. Maybe they didn't want to scare me, or maybe they just didn't have an explanation themselves. I never slept in that room again. Even during the day, if I had to go in there for something, I would rush in and rush out as quickly as possible. I never let the door close behind me, and I never ever looked too long at the corners of the room. Granny and Granddad lived in that house for another 10 years before they moved to a trailer on my uncle's ranch in West Texas. But no matter how much time passed, I never forgot what happened that summer morning. I never stopped wondering what it was, whether it was just a dream or something much, much worse. My father was moving out of the house he had lived in for 19 years, and it was bittersweet to see him leave. This was the only home I had ever known him to live in, and even though it wasn't a particularly happy place, there was something strange about saying goodbye to it. The house had always felt dark to me, not in the sense of poor lighting, but as if it were filled with a heavy, almost oppressive energy. It wasn't just me who felt this way. Anyone who had ever spent time there would mention feeling uneasy, like they were being watched. Some people would laugh it off, saying it was just an old house playing tricks on the mind, but others were more certain something about that place wasn't right. There were little things that happened over the years, but nothing extreme. Lights turning on and off, footsteps in empty rooms, objects disappearing and reappearing in odd places. It never felt like an outright malevolent force, just an unsettling presence lurking in the background. My father himself, unfortunately, was deeply unhappy, and I often wondered if his own negativity had soaked into the house, feeding whatever it was. And then there was my brother. He had once tried to make and use a homemade Ouija board in the house. He claimed nothing had happened, but I later learned that he had never properly closed the session before throwing the board away. It was a Friday afternoon, and my two friends, Mike and Tina, were helping me pack up the last of the boxes. Everyone was exhausted, frustrated, and eager to finish, so we could be done with it. Mike and I were out in the garage clearing away some old junk when an eerie sensation swept over me. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and a wave of goosebumps crawled off my skin. It was the same feeling I always got when something else was in the room. I didn't say anything, though. Mike had always been far more spiritually sensitive than I was, and I wanted to see if G would pick up on it too. It didn't take long. Mike pulled me aside, his voice low but urgent. "There's something in your dad's garage," he said. "It's a dark mass, and it feels really bad. It's been following me all day, and I don't think it likes me, or the fact that I'm here." His words sent a chill through me. I had only felt the presence sporadically that day, mainly in the garage, but Mike had sensed it the entire time. My eyes instinctively darted to where he was pointing, but all I could see was the woodshed behind the garage. I told him to tell it that it wasn't welcome, to cast it away in the name of Jesus, or to surround himself with white light if he felt threatened. Then, trying to shake off the unease, I went back to packing. Hours later, after a long and tiring day, we were on our way home. My father was driving, and Mike, Tina, and I sat in the back seat. Mike kept glancing out of the rear window, his expression unreadable. The car felt stuffy, suffocating, and the entire drive I had an intense sensation of being watched. I told myself I was just spooked from what Mike had said earlier. Maybe I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away when we reached Tina's house so she could grab some clothes for the night. I realized Mike had barely spoken. He kept looking over his shoulder, his jaw tight. Something wasn't right. By the time we got my house, the feeling had grown stronger. The moment we stepped out of the car, an overwhelming need to run flooded through me, like something was right behind us, snapping at our heels. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. But when Mike ushered us inside quickly, I knew he felt it too. We locked the door behind us, went through our usual nighttime routine, and then all gathered in my room. None of us were saying much, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Finally, Mike broke the silence. "Guys, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you sooner, but I think we were followed home. A cold wave of fear rushed through me. Followed, what do you mean, that thing from your dad's garage? He said it's at the front door. Tina's face drained of color. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. It suddenly made sense. The feeling of being watched, the pressure in the air, the way we had all instinctively hurried inside like something was chasing us. Why can't it get in? I whispered. I don't know, Mike admitted, but it's trying. I wanted to believe that we were safe inside, that it couldn't get through the walls of my house. But the fear in Mike's eyes told me otherwise. We huddled together on my bed, each of us reciting different protective prayers. We came from different religious backgrounds, so we all prayed in our own ways. I firmly told whatever it was that it wasn't welcome here, rebuking it in the name of Jesus Christ. Mike closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, his face pale. It's laughing at us, he said, Tina, and I heard nothing but the certainty in his voice made my skin. Us. But it wasn't working. An hour passed. It was still there. Mike said it had moved to the roof now, trying to get in from above. At that exact moment, my dog started growling and barking at the ceiling, confirming every word he was saying. Then we heard it dull, heavy thuds on the rooftop. I have never felt more like a trapped animal in my life. Mike's expression changed as he focused. It's a woman, he said. I don't know why, but it's female, and she followed us because she knows I can see her. My stomach dropped after what felt like an eternity. Mike closed his eyes again and started whispering in his native tongue. I didn't understand what he was saying, but something about it felt powerful. He was calling upon his guardian angel for protection. Then just like that, the energy in the room shifted. The suffocating pressure lifted, the eerie, hair-raising sensation disappeared. It's gone, Mikey said finally. I don't feel it anymore. The relief was overwhelming, but my mind kept racing. Had Mike made all this up? Maybe, but the way my dog had reacted in sync with what he was saying, my own instincts had lined up with his descriptions. It was all too much to be a coincidence. And the next morning, when we told my mother what had happened, she gave us a stunned look and said so, mathing that sent shivers down my spine. I blessed the house yesterday. I don't know what told me to be you. Something did. Could it have been a coincidence? Maybe, but I don't believe in coincidences. Whatever had followed us was real, and whatever it was, it never came back. But then again, I wasn't exactly Lou King for it. There's something deeply personal about the bond I share with this ghost. I don't know exactly what to call him, an old soul, a guardian, or maybe something else entirely, but he's always been done. They're quietly watching over me in his own way. I think he loves me, though not in the way people might assume. It's something deeper, something beyond what I can fully explain. I don't talk about him often, not because I'm afraid, but because it's hard to find the right words that won't make it seem like I'm just imagining things. But I know he's real. I've seen him, felt him, and even heard him in ways that make it impossible to deny. He always appears the same way, dressed in white, his presence light and almost angelic. The first time I saw him clearly, I was washing dishes, just going about my day. I turned slightly, catching movement from the corner of my eye, and there they were, his feet. He wore skinny jeans and Converse shoes, a small detail that struck me as oddly human. He didn't linger for long, disappearing before I could fully process what I had just seen. That was the first time he revealed himself with enough energy to be noticed, and it happened exactly 3 weeks after a family member had left. The first time he interacted with me, though, was years before. That it was late at night, months after I had moved into this house. I was drifting between sleep and wakefulness when I felt something, a kiss. It wasn't intrusive, not even something I would call romantic. It was gentle, light, almost blissful, as if someone was showing affection in the most delicate way possible. I opened my eyes expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. The sensation lingered, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. There was another entity in the house. Another entity in the house. Well, a little girl. I had seen her twice, both times in full detail. The first time I walked into my bedroom and caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. But there was someone else in the mirror too, a girl dressed in white and pink, with long flowing hair that hung down over the bars of my bed frame. At first I thought it was my stepmother, but something about the small hands and delicate form told me otherwise. When I turned to look directly at my bed, she wasn't there the second time I saw her. I caught a full glimpse of her face. She was beautiful, ethereal, almost too perfect to be real. When I told my stepmother what I had seen, she went pale. She had sealed the exact same girl just days before, but she had assumed it was me. A year after I first encountered the ghost boy, I found a small note among my things. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the message was simple: "I love you." At first, Becca, and I thought it might have been from the little girl, but after I had seen him again, I was sure it was him. Over the years, there were small moments, things that should have felt unsettling, but never did. One night during my 5th year living in this house, I had a particularly bad day. I won't go into details, but it had been an emotional mess, and I was sitting alone, lost in my thoughts. I didn't even notice that strands of my hair had fallen over my face until they moved. I felt something brush them behind my ear, a gentle motion like a hand tucking them away. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but my stepmother saw it too. She had been watching from a distance and saw my hair shift, as if something unseen had touched it. It made me smile, even if it didn't fix everything I was dealing with at the time. After that, my connection to him became more obvious. On nights when my family would argue, I would sit in my room quietly talking to him, asking for comfort. Sometimes I would even ask for a hug, and while he never appeared fully, he always made his presence known. One night, while sitting in my room, a cup suddenly tipped over on its own. At the same time, I caught something in the mirror, a faint stream of light, a figure standing there, barely visible. He wasn't strong enough to fully appear, but I saw enough: a head, shoulders, just a glimpse of his form before he faded again. There were moments when he would show himself more clearly. I once saw the outline of his face and hair. Just for a second, he was flirting with me, teasing, almost before vanishing again. Other times, when my room was completely dark, I would catch a faint glow, his eyes watching me from the shadows. He was never forceful, never intrusive. He was gentle, almost like a best friend who cared deeply, but could never fully be there in the way a living person. When he touched me, it was never aggressive, just a soft brush of fingers through my hair, a feather-like kiss on my cheek. The second time I saw him in his angelic form was during a particularly painful time in my life. My father had been betrayed by an old friend, someone he had trusted for 20 years. It was someone I had grown up knowing, someone I had trusted too. The betrayal stung, and I felt completely lost that night as I sat alone, feeling defeated. I saw his hand, just his hand, reaching for mine. It was glowing bright and so angelic that for a moment I wondered if I was imagining it. I couldn't see his full figure from the angle I was sitting, but I felt him. I knew he was there, offering silent comfort. I turned my head quickly, but by then he had already disappeared. I don't know who he was in life or why he's here with me, but I know that he cares. He don't frighten me. He has never tried to hurt me or make me feel uncomfortable. If anything, he has been a silent protector, watching over me in moments when I needed someone the most. Maybe he's someone from another time, someone whose life was cut short too soon. Maybe in another life we had known each other, or maybe he's simply a wandering soul drawn to me for reasons I can't understand. All I know is that I have never felt alone since he appeared. Whether he is a ghost, a guardian, or something else entirely, I know that he is real. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. It happened in my grandparents' apartment, a place that always felt slightly different, though I could never quite explain why. There was a war in my country from 1992 to 1995, and during that war, my uncle, my father's brother, died in the first few months while fighting for freedom. Before his death, he had lived in that same apartment, the one where my grandparents still resided when this event occurred. I don't remember exactly why, but for some reason I had to sleep over at their place that night. I had stayed there other times after this, but I only saw it once on. That first night the apartment was on the second floor of the building, and as soon as you entered the hallway there were 3 doors, one straight ahead leading to the kitchen, one on the left leading to the room where I was supposed to sleep, and one to the right, which was the bathroom. If you stepped into the kitchen and turned left, there was another doorway leading to a small living room where my grandparents were at the time. The room where I was to sleep was the largest in the apartment, doubling as both a main living room and a bedroom. There was also one more door in that room, one that led to my grandparents' bedroom. The door was always locked, and I had been told never to go in there. I never know why, but I didn't question it. That night my grandmother tucked me in, turned off the lights, and closed the door to the hallway, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I wasn't immediately tired, so I lay there, eyes open, trying to adjust to the stillness. Maybe 10 or 20 minutes passed when I heard the hip doorbell ring. I turned toward the glass panel door leading to the hallway and saw my parents arriving. I didn't get up, just watched as they entered and spoke with my grandparents. I was about to turn over and try to sleep when I felt something, a hand pressing lightly against my left shoulder. At first, I thought it was my mother or father coming to say good night, but when I turned to look toward the hallway door, it was still shut. No one had entered the room. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Then I turned back toward the wall, and that's when I saw it, the bedroom door, the bedroom door, the bedroom door, the bedroom door, the bedroom kana. One that was always locked was now wide open, and in the darkness beyond the doorway, I saw eyes. They were 2 yellow glowing circles floating in the pitch blackness of my grandparents' bedroom. The room itself was shrouded in complete darkness, the thick curtains blocking out all outside light, but those eyes, they were there, staring at me, their edges softly illuminated as if they were hollow. For a moment I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to cooperate. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if something was pressing down on me. That brief moment felt like an eternity. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, I yanked the covers over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I lay there for what felt like hours, every nerve in my body on high alert. Finally, I convinced myself to take another look. Slowly, I pulled the blanket down and turned my head back toward the bedroom. The eyes were gone. The door was still open, but whatever had been watching me had disappeared. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. With every ounce of courage I had, I leapt out of bed and ran to turn on the light. The second the bulb flickered to life, I bolted out of the room straight to the small living room where my grandparents and parents were still talking. I was shaking, but I told them what had happened. My grandparents exchanged a look, but neither of them seemed particularly surprised. My father, however, dismissed it as just my imagination to reassure me. They walked back into the room with me. We looked toward the bedroom door, and now suddenly it was closed again. My father, still trying to convince me nothing was wrong, opened the door, switched on the bedroom light, and showed me the empty room. Nothing was there. No glowing eyes, no presence, just a normal empty bedroom. That night, I had no choice but to sleep there again, but I refused to close my eyes for hours, listening to every creak, every rustle of the wind outside, terrified that if I fell asleep it would come back. After that night, something changed. I began having a recurring nightmare, always the same dream. In it, I would be in a room, usually at home, when a shadowy figure would knock on my door. No one else in my family would react to it. No one would hear it but me. Then the shadow would come inside. It would move toward me, slowly at first, then suddenly grabbing me, dragging me away, while my parents sat nearby, unable or unwilling to help me. I had this dream several times a year. It didn't matter where we lived. When we moved apartments, the dreams followed me. Then about 4 years ago, something happened that was worse than the dreams. I woke up one night still groggy, my mind half trapped in sleep. My room was dark, and something felt off. The air was too still, as if everything around me had frozen. And then as my eyes adjusted the darkness, I saw it standing half a meter away from my bed, a shadow, But this time it had no eyes, it was just a figure, a shape, darker than the room itself, standing there motionless for a few horrifying seconds. We stared at each other, then, just like that, it vanished, no movement, no fading, just gone. I sat up in bed, gasping for air, my skin cold with sweat. The dream had come to life. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was my uncle somehow tied to me because of the name my father gave me. Don't know if it was something else, something dark, something not human. When I finally told my father about it, he admitted that he had always felt something strange in my grandparents' apartment. He had never trusted the place, had always thought it might be haunted, but he still didn't believe that my experience was real. There was one more thing, something I never understood, even though I had never sleepwalked before. Whenever I stayed at my grandparents' apartment, I would wake up in their bedroom. Even if I had fallen asleep in the living room, I would somehow end up in that off-limit bedroom, the same one where I had seen the glowing eyes. Sometimes my grandparents would find me sleeping between them, completely unaware of how I had gotten there. I've tried searching online looking for anyone else who has seen yellow glowing eyes like the ones I saw, but I found nothing. Whatever it was, it followed me for years, and I still wonder, was it trying to take me, or was it waiting for something? Growing up in a small village in northern Sulawesi, Indonesia, I was surrounded by stories of the supernatural. My parents had lived there all their lives, as had generations before them. It was a quiet fisherman's village, a place where everyone knew each other and where traditions and beliefs about the unseen were deeply ingrained. I spent my childhood there, never knowing anything different until I moved to the city at the age of 22. But even now, the memories of what I experienced in that village stay with me, stories that make me question just how much of the world is truly explainable. My first encounter with something unexplainable happened when I was too young to remember, but my parents have told me the story many times. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, I would wake up in the middle of the night crying, sometimes screaming for no apparent reason. My mother and father would try to sue me, but I wouldn't stop. And then, as if on cue, the sound would come. It was a strange, inhuman sound, a mixture of bird chirps and a woman's laughter, echoing from just outside my window. My parents could hear it clearly, and whenever the sound came, I would cry even harder, as if something about it terrified me beyond words. My father, determined to find and what was causing it, would step outside and look toward the bushes near my window, but there was never anything there. The closer he got to the bushes, the stronger the feeling of unease became. The hair on his arms and the back of his neck would stand on end, as if something unseen was watching him. Yet, despite his thorough searching, there was nothing there, only the sound growing louder and louder. It was as if the thing was taunting him just beyond reach. Realizing that whatever it was not of this world, my father rushed back inside. He filled a pot with boiling water, went back out and poured it directly into the bushes where the sound had been coming from. The reaction was instantaneous. The strange chirping laughter sound twisted into a scream, not just any scream, but a blood-curdling wail, something between a woman's agonized cry and a cat's deep guttural groan. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. I stopped crying too, as if the thing had lost its grip on me. This happened almost every night. I don't know how my parents endured it, why they never thought of leaving that house. Maybe they believed, as many villagers did, that spirits were simply part of life, something you learn to deal with. Trying to spook the woman walking alone at night, I quickened my pace, reached into my pocket to make sure my cell phone was accessible, and stayed hyper-aware in case the joke escalated into something worse. But as I walked, I realized no one was following me. The road was straight, illuminated by streetlights, and completely empty aside from the occasional passing car. By the time I reached the turn onto the next road, I was more annoyed than scared. The second park I had to pass was smaller, with a newly paved sidewalk that sat above the arc, separated by a metal handrail. Below the railing, a dense spread of blackberry bushes covered the slope, thick with thorns, the kind of place you couldn't walk through without getting shredded. Then as I walked past, I heard it again rustling then. That same high, laugh. It was coming from the bushes right next to me. A bolt of fear shot through me. This time I ran. I sprinted across the street, heading for my neighborhood, reaching for my phone. As my heart pounded, the laughing continued behind me. But it didn't move. It stayed in the bushes, just as it had before. When I reached the turn into my neighborhood, I finally stopped and looked back. Nothing. The sound had stopped. No one had chased me. No figure had emerged from the bushes. The night was silent for the first time. I considered calling 911, but as I stood there shaking out of breath, I started doubting myself. Had I misheard something? Could it have been an animal? But then my rational side took over. If it were a person, they would have had to move incredibly fast from the first park to the second park without making a sound. They would have had to find a way through the blackberry bushes, which were so dense and full of thorns that I couldn't imagine someone getting through without cutting themselves to pieces. If it were an animal, what kind of animal laughs like that? When I got home, I turned on all my outdoor lights, like every lock, and sat in my living room trying to make sense of what happened. I told friends and neighbors, later worried that someone was messing with people, but no one else had ever heard anything like it. Months later, as I thought back on it, I suddenly remembered the nickname for the tree stump in the first park, the leprechaun toilet. The moment I remembered that, the entire experience flashed back to me, and I felt an uneasy chill run down my spine. I wasn't sure if I believed in those things, leprechauns, elves, or trolls, but something about the hold-up experience felt wrong, like it had been more than just a prank or coincidence. I never walked home alone at night again, and I never stepped foot in that park after dark. Not long after I moved out of town. You said original, main, smooth flow, or detailing, maintain, immersive or engaging. Her cheese include suspense or dark element. It was Stan's, or dark element. It was Steve. Patrick's Day, sometime around 2011 or 2012. The night had started off pretty normal. I was out with my friends at a sports bar, enjoying the festive vibe, but our night ended earlier than expected. Our designated driver ran into an ex-boyfriend she didn't want to see, which upset her enough that she decided to leave. Since she was our ride, we all had to cut the night short. I lived in Boulder, just to me from downtown. Instead of going home, I asked to be dropped off near a local bar so I could stay out a little longer. It was only 10:30 p.m., still early, and I figured I could get one last drink before heading home. Plus, I wasn't drinking too much that night. I was recovering from a stomach bug, so I was pacing myself at that point. I had ordered my third beer for the night and was sipping on it while catching up with some people I knew. While the vibe of the place wasn't great, too many people were already way too drunk, stumbling around, slurring their words or starting petty arguments. Those who weren't drunk didn't seem very festive or fun, and so less than an hour later, I decided I'd had enough. I chose to walk home. The weather was decent, no too cold, no rain, and I had walked this route many times before. Postbo was generally a safe town, and I wasn't someone who usually got harassed. Being tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying myself with the confidence I had gained from my military service, I rarely felt unsafe. My route home followed a main road that ran parallel to the bay, about 30 to 50 feet above the water level, separated by a thin stretch of land covered in trees and small businesses. Near downtown, there was a park that extended along the shoreline. It had a walking path shaded by trees, and in that park was a peculiar tree stump. Someone I knew once jokingly called it the leprechaun toilet. I never asked why, just assumed it was one of those weird local nicknames. That's where things got strange. As I walked past the darkened park, I heard rustling in the bushes. At first, I didn't think much of it. Animals were common in the area, but then I heard a laugh. It was high-pitched, eerie, unnatural. It lasted several breaths longer than any normal chuckle. It wasn't the drunken laughter of someone in the distance. It sounded deliberate, too controlled, too intentional. Immediately my instincts kicked in. I Assumed it was kids messing with me, maybe trying to spook the lone woman walking home. My hand instinctively patted my pocket, making sure my cell phone was there in case I needed it. I quickened my pace, keeping my head on a swivel, staying hyper-aware in case this was more than just a prank. But as I walked, something strange. No one followed me. The road was straight with streetlights lining the sidewalk, giving me a clear view in both directions. If someone had been chasing me or running away, I would have seen them. If someone had jumped out from the park, I would have heard footsteps or the sound of movement in the leaves, but there was nothing by the time I reached the next turn in my route. I was still shaken, but trying to push it out of my mind. The second park on my walk home was smaller, running alongside the sidewalk. The city had recently built a new walkway there, so it was smooth and well maintained. The sidewalk was slightly elevated with a metal railing separating it from the park below. Beneath the railing, a dense spread of blackberry bushes covered the slope, making it impossible to walk through without getting shredded by thorns. Then, as I approached that park, I heard it again, the same eerie laugh. This time it came from the bushes right next to me. Panic hit me instantly. There was no way someone could have raced ahead of me and hidden there without me seeing or hearing them. The bushes were too thick, the area too exposed, and yet the laughter came again, sending chills through my entire body. I ran, my heart pounded in my ears as I sprinted across the street, heading for my neighborhood. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911. But as I ran, something unnerving happened. The laughter didn't follow me. It stayed in the bushes. That didn't make sense. If this was someone trying to mess with me, they would have chased after me, or at least moved closer. But instead, the sound remained in that one spot, like it wasn't attached to a person, but to the place itself. I reached the turn into my neighborhood and finally stopped, panting, out of breath. I spun around, looking back at the park, phone in and ready to call the cops, but the night was silent. The laughter was gone. The bushes weren't moving. There was no one there. I stood there for a moment, my pulse racing, my breath shaky. I was half expecting to see a figure emerge from the darkness, but nothing happened. I forced myself to run the rest of the way home, throwing on every light the second I stepped inside. I checked all the locks, paced around my living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. At first, I tried to convince myself that I had misheard something. Maybe it was an animal noise, maybe my fear had amplified the sound in my mind. But then I thought about the logistics of what had happened. If it was a person, they would have had to move from the first park to the second park extremely fast without me hearing any running or footsteps cut through blackberry bushes, so dense that they would have torn themselves apart somehow, project their laughter from a fixed location without actually being seen. If it was an animal, what kind of animal laughs like that? I told friends and neighbors about it later, worried that maybe someone was messing with people at night, but no one else had heard of anything similar. Months later, I remembered the weird nickname for the tree stump at the first park, the leprechaun toilet. The moment that memory surfaced, I felt that same chill crawl down my spine. I had never believed in things like elves, trolls, or leprechauns, but something about that night made me question everything. Whatever that was, it was real. I never walked home alone at night again. And not long after I left that town for good, it happened about a year ago when I was 16 years old. It was a nice spring day, nothing unusual about it. I got home from school around 400 p.m. Did what I normally did, headed straight for the basement to relax. Our basement wasn't the creepy kind. It was more like a second living room, fully carpeted with a TV, couch, and plenty of space. It was my go-to spot whenever I wanted to be alone for a bit. The entrance to the basement was just a door on the main floor that led to a staircase down to the lower level, and that day the door was wide open. I wasn't alone. My dog was with me, lying lazily on the carpet, enjoying the quiet. My mom wasn't home, and there was no one else in the house. It was just me and my dog unwinding after a long day. Then I heard it, footsteps, loud, clear footsteps moving across the floor above me. At first, I assumed it was my mom. Maybe she had come back home while I was watching TV and I just hadn't noticed. But something felt off. I hadn't heard the front door open. I paused for a second, listening more closely. The footsteps continued, steady, deliberate, moving from one side of the house to the other. My dog's ears perked up immediately. He wasn't just reacting to my sudden stillness, he heard it too. Still not wanting to overthink it, I casually called out, "Hey, Mom." No response. The footsteps didn't stop. My dog was on high alert. Now ears pointed his body. And then suddenly he bolted upstairs. That's when I knew something wasn't right. If it had really been my mom, my dog wouldn't have reacted like that. He wouldn't have run up barking on edge, searching for something unseen. My stomach dropped, but I followed him upstairs. The whole way up I could still hear the footsteps clear as day, but the moment I reached the top of the stairs, everything stopped. Silence. The air felt different, like when you walk into a room and know someone has just been there, but there's no one in sight. I hesitated, my heart pounding hard in my chest. If someone had broken in, they would have heard me coming. Up the stairs, maybe they were hiding now. I spent the next 10 minutes checking every room. I looked in the closets, behind doors, even under furniture. Nothing. No open windows, no signs of forced entry. House was exactly as I had left it. My dog, however, wasn't convinced. He kept sniffing around, ears twitching, eyes darting around like he was tracking something invisible. At this point, I was definitely unsettled, but decided to shake it off and head back downstairs. Maybe I was imagining maybe it was just the house settling, except no. I knew what footsteps sounded like. I sat back on the basement couch, leaving the door open again. My dog settled beside me, still on edge but slowly relaxing. Then 20 minutes later, it started again. Boom. Bum bum, loud, distinct, unmistakable footsteps moving across the floor. This time my dog didn't just perk up. He started barking, growling at the staircase. His entire posture shifted into defense mode, as if something was right there at the top of the stairs watching us. My skeptical side was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe I was having some kind of auditory hallucination, except my dog was hearing it too. The footsteps continued, sometimes slow and deliberate, other times faster, as if someone was pacing in frustration. At one point it even sounded like someone was stomping their foot repeatedly. I refused to go back upstairs alone. Instead, I sat there frozen, trying my best to ignore the noises. Over the next hour, the footsteps would start and stop, growing more intense, then suddenly going quiet again. I kept expecting something, anything to explain it, but nothing did. Then, as suddenly as it had started, stopped completely. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open. This time for real. My mum was home. I rushed upstairs, relieved, but before I could say a word, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Why have you been spraying cologne all over the place?" I froze. Cologne? I hadn't smelled anything, not even the faintest trace, but she was adamant. She said the house, reek of it, as if someone had drenched the place in an overpowering scent. I told her everything that had happened, the footsteps, the dog's reaction, how the sound stopped the second I went upstairs. She brushed it off, said I was just hearing things, but I know what I heard, and so did my dog. I didn't want to stick around to find out if the noises would come back, so I grabbed my dog's lash and took him on a long walk. When I finally returned home a few hours later, the house was quiet. The footsteps never returned that night. I still don't know what to make of it. I know houses creak and sounds can carry in weird ways, but this was different. It was too deliberate, too consistent. And the way it stopped the second I came upstairs, as if whoever or whatever had been walking around knew I was coming, was deeply unsettling. And the cologne smell, I don't even know where to begin with that. A part of me wants to believe there's a rational explanation, but another part of me wonders, was I really alone in the house that day? My wife and I have been running a care business for 15 years, and one of our services includes staying at customers' homes to care for their pets while they are away. Over the years, we have stayed in dozens of different houses, sometimes together, sometimes separately when multiple houses hitting jobs overlap. Despite all this time in unfamiliar places, I have rarely experienced anything truly paranormal, just the occasional odd feeling or vague sense of something unusual. But there was one house that changed that for me, one experience that still lingers in my mind, making me wonder about what I really encountered. It was about 5 years ago when my wife Julie and I were watching a basset hound named Emmy. This wasn't a new house to us. I had been taking care of rabbits in that home for over 10 years before Ebby. The owners had another basset hound named Tubby, a wonderful old dog I had looked after many times. The house itself was a 1940s ranch-style home, updated over the years with a more modern feel, unlike many ranch-style homes. Though this one had a large finished basement, it was comfortable, familiar, and never once in all those years had I experienced anything remotely strange until that week. It was a Saturday afternoon, the second or third night of our stay. Julie and I were sitting in the den at one end of the house. I decided to take a nap in the bedroom, which was down a long hallway that stretched across the house. Since it was daytime, the light on the nightstand next to the bed was already on. It was an older lamp, the kind that needed a firm twist to turn off, and it made a loud clicking sound when switched. I had just started to drift off when I heard a loud click. Immediately, I realized the light had been turned off. My eyes snapped open, and I looked around. The room was now dim, and the lamp that had been on only moments ago was now off. I sat up, feeling uneasy. It wasn't the kind of lamp that could turn off on its own. It required effort to twist the switch. I got up and walked down the hall to tell Julie about it. She was sitting in the den, completely absorbed in her book. She hadn't moved. I mentioned what had happened, and she listened, but wasn't particularly alarmed at that moment. I wasn't exactly scared either, just puzzled. Maybe I thought if there was a spirit in the house, it was trying to tell me I was wasting electricity. It was an odd thought, but at the time it helped me shake off the uneasiness. I went back to bed and continued my nap. That night, something far stranger happened. Julie and I went to bed around 11:30. I am someone who wakes up frequently during the night, and at around 3 o'clock in the morning, I found myself suddenly awake. At first, everything seemed normal. The room was dark and quiet, and Julie was asleep beside me. Then I became aware of a sound near my side of the bed. There were voices. It took me a moment to process what I was hearing. It wasn't just random noise, it was a conversation. Two distinct voices speaking back and forth, deeply engaged in discussion. The problem was the voices didn't sound human. They weren't muffled whispers or distorted sounds from a TV left on in another room. They were clear and strong right beside me, yet completely foreign the best way. All I can describe is that the voices sounded guttural, almost rough, but not like any language I had ever heard. It reminded me of how the boy in The Shining sounded when he repeated the word redrum in that eerie, unnatural voice. Except these voices were deeper and faster, like they were arguing in heated tones. I sat up slightly, trying to locate the source. The voices were right at the foot of the bed, as if two unseen beings were standing there, disputing something urgent. I couldn't understand a word, but the intensity sent chills down my spine. I reached over and turned on the lamp. As the light filled the room, the voices faded, like someone was slowly turning down a radio. Within seconds, there was silence. The person sleeping next to me stirred, noticed the light, and I told them what had happened. They were groggy, but listened as I explained. Though they tried to comfort me, I stayed awake, unable to shake the feeling that something not human had been there. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to rationalize. Could it have been a dream? No, I was fully awake, an auditory hallucination. Maybe, but I had never experienced anything like that before, or since a TV or radio. None had been left on. I thought about asking the homeowners if they'd ever heard anything strange, but they were practical and traditional. I didn't want to risk saying something too bizarre, so I stayed quiet. They eventually retired and moved away. I never returned to that house. Still, the memory of that night lingers. The voices didn't sound human. Were they spirits from another time, or from somewhere beyond our understanding? I have no answers, only questions. Another story comes from a family property, passed down through generations. The house was built on a lot with a deep history. The bricks came from salvaged materials, and artifacts were found around the land, buttons from old military uniforms and relics from indigenous tribes once native to the area. A visiting archaeologist confirmed some items were thousands of years old, some likely from the Creek tribe. Despite the home's charm and historic significance, there's no denying the lingering presence. The first sighting of what we now call the woman in white happened when someone in the family was a teenager. She was woken up by a puppy barking and growling at the foot of the bed. Annoyed, she sat up and turned on the lamp and saw her. A young woman stood at the foot of the bed, dressed in an old-fashioned white nightgown, staring without blinking. Panic surged, and she screamed for her parents, hiding her face under the covers. Her hands flew to her face. She screamed. When her father rushed into the room, the woman was gone. She peeked through her fingers. Nothing. Her father dismissed it as a dream, but she knew what she saw. The light stayed on the rest of the night. The dog, however, seemed to know more. For several nights after, it continued to growl at something unseen at the foot of the bed. Others in the family started having their own experiences. One afternoon, while I was home alone with my grandmother, I was cleaning the bathroom when I heard fast, light footsteps racing down the hallway. Glorious. I looked out, and just then, a column of smoke as wide as my body shot past me, brushing my face with a rush of cold air. It disappeared as suddenly as it had come. When I told my grandmother, she just nodded and said, "Oh, that happens sometimes in the afternoon." Another time I saw the woman in white for myself. It was during the holidays, and family had gathered in the living room. I glanced toward the hallway, and there she was, leaning gently against the wall. Watching the kids play, she had long hair and a soft, content expression. She wasn't staring intensely, just observing, like she belonged. She stood there, solid, until she turned and walked into the kitchen. Then she was gone. No one else saw her, but I know what I witnessed. Sometimes she interacts with objects in subtle ways. Photos are mysteriously moved. Once after we hung an old portrait, a wardrobe beneath it kept opening on its own for days. When cleaning, I often feel her standing beside me, never threatening, just present. I've spoken to her, promising to care for the house. Now and then, I hear a small object fall nearby, like she's answering. Many in the family have woken to see her sitting on the edge of the bed, just watching. Strangely, it isn't frightening. She doesn't seem angry or lost. If anything, she seems protective. My mother remains unsettled by her, but I've never felt fear, only curiosity. We don't know who she is, maybe a soul connected to the land, or someone tied to its long history. All I know is she's part of the house now, a guardian, perhaps one that's never truly left. We both thought nothing of it and went to sleep that night. I had disturbing dreams, but I didn't connect them to anything unusual at the time. The next day, I kept thinking about the door. What was odd was that I had left it open about in the past. I had left it open even less than that, and it had never moved. There were no open windows, no strong air current, and the air conditioner wasn't even on. It didn't make sense, but I still tried to push it out of my mind. A week later, on July 2nd, 2015, I was in the car with my friends Crystal and Alex. We were on our way to Dallas, Texas, to celebrate Independence Day. While we were driving, Crystal told us something strange. She said that while she was waiting for us to pick her up, she had heard knocking on her bedroom window. This wasn't the first time she or her family had experienced something unusual. They had all been hearing and seeing a presence in their home. She mentioned that it started with strange noises, but one night she woke up to find a man standing over her, smiling. That story stuck with me, but I didn't realize just how much it would. start to connect with my own experiences on the night of July the 13th. I went to bed as usual, but early in the morning on July the 14th at around 2:50 I woke up suddenly. There was knocking on my window. At first I was groggy, unsure if I had imagined it. Then 3 more knocks sounded clear, deliberate, and right outside my window I felt my toddler daughter shift in her sleep beside me, as if she had heard it too. Though she didn't wake up, I could tell she had sensed it. I lay there for a moment, frozen. Then I gathered my courage and woke up my parents, telling them that someone was outside. My father immediately went outside to check, circling the house with a flashlight. No one was there. Later that evening on July the 14th, I was sitting in my bedroom alone. The light was on, and so was my television. I made 4 calls to my boyfriend, but he didn't answer because he had his phone on silent. After my 4th call at around 11:45 p.m., I put my phone face up on my bed and went to the restroom down the hall to remove my makeup and brush my teeth. I was gone for about 9 minutes. When I returned at 11:54 p.m, my phone was exactly where I had left it, face up on the bed, but something was wrong. I checked my phone and saw that while I was in the restroom, I had 5 missed calls from my boyfriend. I didn't think much of it at first. Instead of calling him back, I sent him a quick text. "Hey, sorry, I was in the restroom washing off my makeup. I'm going to try to get some sleep. Good night, I love you." Immediately after I sent the text, he called me again. I answered, "Hello." His response was unsettling. "Please tell me you answered your phone the second time I called you." Confused, I told him, "No, my phone was in my bedroom the entire time I was in the restroom." There was silence on the line for a moment before he spoke again, his voice uneasy. "The second time I called you, someone answered." Chills ran down my body. I asked him what he meant. He said that after my first missed call, he tried calling me again, and someone picked up. But all he could hear was the sound of running water and a strange voice speaking in the background. The sound had unsettled him so much that he hung up immediately. I had been alone in the house, and everyone else was asleep. My phone had been in my bedroom, untouched. Panic set in. I didn't want to be alone, so I asked my boyfriend to come pick me up so I could stay at his place for the night. As I waited for him to arrive, I grabbed my purse, which was right next to my feet. The moment I stood up, my television turned off by itself. At first, I thought I had accidentally stepped on the remote, but after searching my bed and floor, I found it on the opposite side of the room, nowhere near me. That was enough for me. I ran to the front door and waited for my boyfriend outside. The next day, I told my grandmother about everything that had happened. She immediately told me to get my house. Blessed, she had dealt with something similar decades ago, and after getting her home, blessed, the experiences never happened again. That evening, my father sprinkled holy water throughout my bedroom. He also placed a blessed rosary above my bed. I felt safer after that. Later that night, I went to my boyfriend's place again. We watched a movie and went to sleep around 11 o'clock p.m. But sometime between 1:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. I woke up again. I had been sleeping with my body facing the wall. When I turned over to switch positions, I opened my eyes and saw him standing about 6 feet away from the bed. Was a man. He was tall, around 5'10" to 6 feet, wearing a white shirt. He was smiling at me. I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced I was just seeing things. I opened them again. He was still there. Panic surged through me. Quickly pulled the blanket over my head and forced myself to sleep, refusing to look again. The next morning, I thought about Crystal's story, the man she had seen standing over her smiling. It was too similar. The knocking, the phone, the strange occurrences, it was all connected. I have never experienced anything like this before. It feels surreal, like something out of a horror movie. I don't know if there is a logical explanation for any of this, or if something is really attached to me. All I know is that I don't feel safe anymore.